Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and with the release of Minas Tirith, I figured now is the perfect time to take a look at every single LEGO Lord of the Rings and Hobbit minifigure ever released, from the themes beginning in 2012 all the way up to now in 2026. There's only one problem. I feel like I'm not in the right setting to make this video.
That's much better. I've made it all the way to Hobbiton here in New Zealand, where this seems to be the perfect place to showcase every single Lord of the Rings minifigure on location in the Shire. So, of course, I feel like we have to start off with the Hobbits. Here's a quick overview of all of our Hobbit and Hobbit-adjacent characters from LEGO Lord of the Rings. One thing you'll start to notice is that many of these are basically just different variations of the same characters, which makes a lot of sense, given how they're important in the movies, but really only a few named characters are important when it comes to the Hobbits, as opposed to a lot of the other armies and characters we'll look at from different races, which feature a lot of army builder characters and more generic minifigures. So this is a really interesting lineup because they've covered almost all of the main important outfits for the characters that we see throughout the films. Of course, I'm gonna have to start off with Frodo Baggins here, and he has so many different outfits to himself, so let's jump into him right now. Of course, we have to start off with our minifigure from one of the very first scenes we see in the Lord of the Rings movies, and that is Frodo in his casual sand green outfit. This minifigure appeared in 2012 for the Gandalf Arrive set, but also came in a small poly bag, allowing you to have a number of ways to get him, and it is Frodo at his happiest before he had the burden of the ring. As you can see, he is not holding it in his hand right now, and it's really cool how they managed to depict that as a small little LEGO set. Now, you can see the design they were going for with the Hobbits. Since this is the first one we are looking at, I want to emphasize a few key details here. Obviously, they were using these short legs. This was before they actually had dual molding introduced for the legs, or dual molding introduced really in general for LEGO, because this was 2012, so he just has his plain legs with no semblance of the feet being showing. However, they actually made a brand new hairpiece that they use for pretty much every single Hobbit minifigure. In fact, it's very rare to find a Hobbit that does not use this hairpiece, but they made it as a specialized new mold in 2012. Even the modern versions of Frodo use it to this day, and I think it's a pretty perfect hairpiece to use. It just fits the characters really well. I think the facial prints here are really interesting because these minifigures in 2012 had a very stylized graphic design, and it's going to be a lot more apparent when we look at some of the other races, like if you look at some of the elf minifigures who are like yelling really angrily or have very aggressive printed cheek lines, but you can even see a little bit of it in the Hobbit minifigures of 2012, where they have a graphic design style that is a little bit different compared to your modern LEGO minifigure, and that's something that the modern versions of Frodo have improved and cleaned up, but it's interesting seeing how things have changed over the years. And this is a really nice starter minifigure to get. It's not the most exciting figure or not the craziest design, but it's a really nice one because it showcases the beginning of his journey. And speaking of the beginning of his journey in chronological movie order, this is our next casual Frodo outfit. Flashing forward all the way to 2025, last year we got the Shire as a set, and that one came with Frodo wearing a specially nice outfit for Bilbo's birthday party. Now this one does have dual molded legs, showcasing how LEGO does try to improve their minifigures over time, and it's really interesting because they wanted to showcase them not wearing any shoes, so obviously you have the tan molded on the bottom there, which is quite funny to see. He does have a special new facial expression for the minifigure exclusive to this character because they wanted to show him very happy in this scene. So I like the printing of the gap in between the teeth. I feel like that's a nice touch. He does have a more standard smile on the back there, and this minifigure overall is really nicely produced with metallic copper designs for the print of the minifigure. It's probably never going to really appear in any other set. It's a very scene-specific outfit, but I like how they went the extra effort of making an exclusive minifigure just for that. As Frodo sets off on his journey, he receives a new outfit, and this is the one predominantly used throughout the 2012 and some 2013 Lord of the Rings sets, featuring a dark green cloak. He does have the One Ring as the accessory and Sting as the sword, a specialized mold they made for the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit sets back in the day, and then they made a newer version of it for the Rivendell set. This is a really interesting minifigure because they made a specialized face print for Frodo. Again, you can see how they really wanted to exaggerate some of the facial features there, so I wanted to showcase him with the scared expression here because Obviously, he has the very bright blue eyes, showcasing maybe him being stabbed by the Morgul blade, or maybe him being in the shadow world where he has put on the ring and now he's invisible. And then, of course, you have a more standardized alternate expression on the back, showing some of the wrinkles around his eye bags, like it's already setting in with the stress of the ring. Technically, there is a separate variant of this minifigure included in the Rivendell set that we got, not the new one, but the old one, all the way back in 2013. This is identical to the one that we just looked at, except he doesn't have the cape on because he took it off when he was in bed recovering and they wanted to depict that. So here he just has the regular print on the torso. You can see what the print looks like on the back. And I like how they wanted to differentiate the characters in between different scenes. It really goes to show that they put a lot of extra care and attention into the Lord of the Rings series. We did, however, get a new version of this character for the Rivendell set in Lord of the Rings' big relaunch in 2013, and while a lot of the details of the figure are the same, he does feature a slightly updated torso print and those dual molded legs, plus bringing back that dark green short cape and the hairpiece, which they used pretty much unchanged from 2012. The interesting thing about this figure is, again, they did a brand new mold for the sword Sting here, which is part of the Lord of the Rings weapon pack, and then going ahead and removing the cape so you can see the detail underneath. The printing is just ever so slightly different and updated compared to the original. It still is very similar, and I do like how similar it is because obviously it is meant to depict that one outfit, but you can see the extra little layer of effort they put into making it match the more standardized graphic design. And even the facial expression he has on the back there is a bit more toned down than the very extreme, gasping, scared expression he had on the older minifigure, which is emblematic of the minifigure graphic design they had going on at the time. The alternate expression he has on the back here is a little bit more subtle and muted, still showing the milky blue eyes, which makes sense for the character, but I think it fits a lot more into LEGO's standard graphic design on this style as opposed to the other minifigure, which is very nice to see. And I like how on one side he does have a smile there instead of just that worried face. In some of the later films, Frodo received a different color of cloak, this time in gray, and that is what this minifigure depicts right here, also from the 2012 and 2013 lineup. This one is identical to the other one that we saw, except he does have a dark gray color of cloak, which makes sense to match those specific scenes. Otherwise, we've already taken a look at this minifigure on the list, so let's move on. The Barad-dûr set introduced a very specialized version of Frodo, and this is one that has a unique helmet mold. It's an interesting one because it is meant to depict their orc disguises as they traverse through the land of Mordor, and it's really interesting to see them make a specialized molded element specifically for this piece. Obviously, this was part of a helmet multi-pack, which allowed them to make so many different orc helmets for essentially the price of one mold exclusive to the Barad-dûr set, but it's really cool how they actually made this specifically match his disguise in the movie. Of course, it also does have a hairpiece included if you want to display him like that, but I feel like this one is a lot more interesting and unique that way. And the headpiece is the same as the 2023 one we just looked at. Next up, we have his ever-loyal companion, Sam, here, and this is a great minifigure. It's actually the only version of Sam that we got back in 2012 with a dark gray cloak. Interestingly enough, they actually did not decide on what the coloration of his hair should be. They went with this lighter shade for the 2012 sets, and then actually for the 2023 relaunch, they recolor the hair to dark orange, which I think better matches the minifigure in the actor designs, but honestly, I still feel so used to this design being the coloration I'm used to. It's the one that I grew up with, so it is still a little bit odd to see him with the different color of hair. This is a very nicely produced minifigure, and again, even though he really only appeared once, which I think was a total crime given the importance of the character, they put a lot of effort into crafting the minifigure detailing to match up with what we see in the movie, including the rucksack that he has holding their lembas spread, and again, a very, very unique expression on the back, which I think is almost a little bit too stylized compared to what we're used to today for LEGO minifigure graphic design showcasing the scared expression on the back. LEGO would tone that down today if they were to make that exact expression again, but for its time I think it works, and again I actually really like the expression that they use here for the front of the face. I feel like it does capture the likeness of the actor very well, so definitely a fan of how they pulled this one off. Chronologically, the very first time we see Sam is in this outfit, which was exclusive to the 2025 Shire set. It features more casual clothes for Sam, and unlike the 2012 version of the character, he has a darker tone of hair, the dark orange color to be specific. I did include some vegetables for him to do his signature gardening in this outfit, and it's a really cool one to get because obviously it only represents his outfit as seen in the very early scenes of Lord of the Rings. He does have a very different outfit throughout the rest of the movie, and that carries over to all of his other appearances, but they intended to make this one very scene specific, to have him be a little bit more dressed up for Bilbo's birthday, so they wanted to give us a special outfit like this, and he does have an alternate expression like so, a more serious one on the other side, and then a standard smile with kind of a cocked eyebrow on one side here, which I think fits Sam alright as a character. I don't really know if that fits the actor's likeness that well, and I almost prefer the older design that we got before. I actually feel like the hair is a little bit too bright here. I wish they went with the original color, but I have to say the outfit is really nicely produced and the dual molded legs look really good. Our upgraded version of the minifigure we just saw appeared in the 2023 Rivendell relaunch of Lord of the Rings, and this one does have a really nice sand blue cape. This is when they changed his hair color to dark orange, and again, as I mentioned in the first minifigure, I actually prefer the older one. Maybe I'm just really used to seeing Sam with that older hairstyle because that was, again, the one I grew up with. It was the one in the video games, so I really associate that hair coloration with him, but I don't know, I feel like the more muted color scheme worked a bit better for the character's hairpiece. Now that being said, I do like a lot of the details here. He does have that same serious expression on the back. Rotating the cape, you can see the print on the back of the torso as well is just a lot cleaner than what we saw previously on the older minifigure. They've definitely cleaned up a lot of the print lines here. So altogether, it's really nicely produced. Just that hairpiece is throwing me off. And finally, here's our version of Sam from Barad-dûr. This one does come with the exclusive molded helmet showcasing his orc disguise, and it is again a very specialized and really cool mold that probably will remain exclusive to that set. He does have the same torso and printing on the front to the back as the other minifigure. No cape this time because he was in Mordor and presumably it was very hot there, so he did not have to wear his cloak, but it is really cool to get that helmet. And I guess officially the minifigure doesn't have the helmet as part of the official figure. He just has the hair, but obviously I wanted to display this one with the helmet because it is such a unique design, and he's got a sword as well. In chronological order of the movie appearances, this is our very first Peregrine Cook, aka Pippin minifigure. This is from the 2025 Shire set, featuring the more formal clothing that he wore during Bilbo Baggins' birthday, and this does come with a pretty fun surprise as well. I really love the printing on the minifigure, showcasing the metallic green, or the metallic gold against the dark green. I think that looks really nice. The facial expression is pretty good for the character. I think that they could have done maybe a bit of a better job replicating his facial features, but I think it looks good enough to showcase him laughing during that scene, and of course he does have the dual molded legs. However, this minifigure also included an alternate face with the Ninjago movie Kai hairpiece recolored in dark gray to showcase the fireworks exploding in his face and what his face looked like after that. I think that's a really funny addition, and I'm really glad they managed to make a very specific alternate version of the minifigure just to depict that scene of the fireworks blowing up in their faces. It's a nice touch and one that probably will never appear outside of any other sets like this, but it's a cool one to get to make the Lord of the Rings minifigures feel very distinct and obviously very close to replicating specific scenes there. Our next Pippin minifigure, though, is a lot more standard compared to what we're used to seeing. This flashes all the way back to 2012, showcasing the character design that they put out in 2012, and I think it really goes to show that LEGO absolutely nailed the designs of the Hobbits when they did it for the first time for that initial Lord of the Rings line. This one is exclusive to the Mines of Moria set, and he does come with an olive green cape, which is a slightly rarer color of the short cape, and in contrast to the minifigure we just saw, I feel like this does an even better job at portraying the actor's likeness, and a lot of that is because LEGO has that, again, very specialized graphic design for Lord of the Rings back in 2012, where they really were trying their best to replicate the actors' faces and very extreme expressions, and some of it can end up looking a bit uncanny and not like a regular LEGO minifigure, but this just looks pretty perfect to me. I love how he looks very worried, like he's scared or he's messed up. Maybe Gandalf is calling him a fool of a took during this scene, which is why he's kind of of got that wobble in his smile, and it's not the kind of detail LEGO would put into a minifigure nowadays because they want to make them a lot more generic in their designs, but I like how much effort they put into depicting a character like this to have some very distinct facial expressions. Even the scared expression there feels so much more animated and alive compared to standard LEGO minifigure designs, and again, it's not something they would do today, but it's cool how back in the day they really wanted to go that extra mile to have the extra level of effort put into the character designs. For me, I feel like there is a balance to be struck. I think that something like the scared expression you see here is maybe a little bit too extreme for minifigure design. It feels almost too stylized for what I would expect to see from a standard LEGO minifigure. But then again, the face on the other side, which is also stylized, feels like it fits the actor's likeness so much better. So it's hard to complain about that. And I definitely do feel like there is a really nice sweet spot in the middle that LEGO could probably find as they continue to craft their minifigures, where the modern ones feel a little bit too generic, but for now, this is a great minifigure to get and one that replicated the design of the character very, very nicely. We got our updated version of Pippin here for the relaunch of Lord of the Rings with the Rivendell set in 2023. And I was just complaining about the facial expressions not matching the characters in modern minifigures, but this one is actually really well done. I feel like this does a very good job at replicating the expression of the character. It looks really good and very much like how he actually appears in the movie. This one, of course, does have those dual molded legs, which are quite nice, an updated design of the print, which I think is cleaner and better than the original one. The scarf detailing is actually a little bit simplified, but it feels like it fits the LEGO style a lot better than the scarf that the other figure had, which almost had a little bit too much detail. And then he has a happy expression on the other side, which I think that kind of double chin on the bottom really does kind of help emphasize the design of the character, and that's what the back printing looks like right there. We got our latest version of the Fool of a Took minifigure in the 2026 Minas Tirith set, and this one is really interesting because it reuses the torso that the Gondor Knights use, so this is the same torso underneath these minifigures here, but this one actually does come with the legs as well as the cape and the headpiece for Pippin, so it is a special minifigure showcasing the outfit that he wore during those scenes. I do have one minor quibble with this one, and that's that they did not recolor the dual molded legs, so he still has the dark blue pants going onto the feet there. If you look at the minifigure or the character in those movie scenes, he's actually wearing black pants, so I feel like the dark blue just isn't quite right for the character. I do like, however, that they did introduce a brand new face print for him. This one is determined and angry, and the other side is his standard smile but with the open mouth, and I think that that is super cool how they actually gave him a specialized new face print to depict him being slightly angrier at this point in the movie or more determined, so that is really cool that they went that extra level of detail, especially for a modern LEGO minifigure where I feel like they are so budget constrained and conscious nowadays that it's always special to get a new minifigure head print. But moving on from Pippin, it's time to look at Merry, and this is Merry's chronological first outfit we see, so this one came out in 2025 for the Shire set. Obviously, I'm showcasing him with the fireworks exploding in his face, where he also did get a variant for that, but he does have an alternate expression, so if you want to see what the print looks like on the back, this is what he looks like here. And again, for Merry, they actually switched Merry and Sam's hair color for the modern relaunch of Lord of the Rings. This one is using the darker tan coloration of hairpiece there versus the other one that used the dark orange. And again, I don't really know if I love that. Maybe it's just nostalgia that's blinding me to the hair color that I'm used to, and I'm sure that LEGO designers thought about it a lot and decided that this just looks a lot better. But for me personally, I definitely preferred the other color of hair that he used to have. I feel like it just was very distinct for the minifigures, and now it's kind of confusing to set them all apart, especially in a lineup, because they've gone ahead and swapped the hair colors. Altogether though, I do think the facial expressions of the minifigure are really nice. The outfit is cool as well, how they wanted to depict a very specific outfit, but let's see what else they look like for the other versions of the character. This right here is our original Merry minifigure from the Lord of the Rings lineup in 2012. You can see him using the dark orange color of hair there, and he does have the dark olive color of cape, or the olive green, which is quite nice to see, a standard short sword, and then the dark green outfit. Again, I still feel like they kind of nailed the Hobbit designs when they launched Lord of the Rings back in 2012. They kind of hit perfection right there, and it was very hard to find ways to improve that, even for the newer minifigures. Dual molding was, of course, one way they did that, but you can see that moving the cape to the side, what the alternate print on the back looks like, as well as the alternate very angry expression that he's got, which again, I think this feels almost a little bit too extreme. I can kind of see what they're going for, and I do think it matches the actor very well, but that's an example of the older minifigure designs just going a little bit too far, in my opinion, for the very exaggerated angry yells. Altogether, though, the standard version of the minifigure does look very nice, and let's take a look at the updated version right now. Here is our updated version of Merry from the 2023 Rivendell set. Again, as you can see, they have changed the coloration of his hair and given him dual molded legs, which definitely is a pretty major upgrade. Otherwise, this minifigure is similar to the original one, but one thing you will notice is that, at least from what I can tell, the yellow printing on the shirt is done a little bit more crisp and clean compared to the original. It also has metallic gold printing factored in, which is very nice to see, a brand new facial expression, and on the other side, he has a smile or a laugh instead of that angry expression that he has on the other minifigure. That's what the printing on the back of the torso looks like. Nothing super crazy going on, but again, a nice minifigure to get, and one that replicates the design of the characters in the movies quite well. But now it's time to turn our eye over to the Hobbit trilogy, and we're going to take a look at Bilbo Baggins here, our final most important named Hobbit. And Bilbo gets a ton of different outfits. There are 7 different versions of Bilbo across the years, which is crazy to see. I believe that matches Frodo's, but his is even more special because every single one of his outfits are different, whereas Frodo just has many variations of the same outfit. So this is the first version of Bilbo we see from the unexpected gathering at his house. It is his casual home attire with kind of, you can see the standard overalls there. He has the ring, and then that's what the expression looks like on the back. Slightly worried, perhaps, that so many dwarves are showing up at his house, and altogether I think it is a really nice depiction of the character that just looks like it matches the movie very nicely. We got a really specialized version of Bilbo for a video game exclusive, and this was the Good Morning Bilbo Baggins minifigure with printed arms, the only other minifigure from Lord of the Rings to have printed arms other than King Aragorn in 2026. This one was really special because it was his pajamas he wore when he woke up after the dwarves had left his house, and he was kind of wondering what was going on, or if he was going to go on this adventure or not, and they depicted this minifigure really nicely. I'm honestly so impressed by the level of detail and attention they put into making this minifigure. He was produced in a slightly different factory as opposed to your standard LEGO minifigures. Actually, it was the same factory that made collectible minifigs around that time. So the printing on the face is a little bit off compared to the standard Bilbo minifigure. The eyes are just a little bit too large, and it almost could be mistaken for a knockoff minifigure unless you're very familiar with the different types of plastic and printing that LEGO did in different factories back then. But I have to say, it's really well done. The printing of the arms is so nice. I love how they went the extra layer of detail to print on the arms. It's just so cool to see that. So altogether, definitely a big fan of this minifigure. I think it is probably my favorite iteration of Bilbo yet, just because of that crazy level of detail they did for the sleeves on the arms there on a minifigure that appears for maybe a couple of seconds, not even maybe a full minute in the movie. Of course, then we get to his main attire as seen throughout the Hobbit movies, at least for the first movie there, and that is this dark red jacket. This one was the most common one to appear throughout the Hobbit sets, and you can see he has been equipped with Sting, who he finds in the Troll Horde partway through the first movie. This one does have the standard dark tan legs because they had not figured out dual molding yet at this time, but otherwise is pretty much the same as all of your other Lord of the Rings Hobbit minifigures here. And you can see he does have a very scared expression on the back. Again, I feel like that's almost a little too exaggerated for me. Like, this feels almost way too extreme, even for the character. He did get frightened quite a lot in the first movie especially, but it just feels like they pushed the graphic design a little too far for these minifigures. So, not the biggest fan of that one, but I do like how they were still kind of experimenting with giving minifigures different styles back then. Here's the outfit that he wore throughout the Battle of the Five Armies movie, and it's a much more muted color scheme, the dark blue outfit, wearing a coat for the snow around the mountain, and I think it fits really nicely for the character. The graphic design of the minifigure is really nice here, and it really goes to show how LEGO was continuing to improve their minifigure designs as we moved into 2014 and 15. On the back there, he still does have that very frightened expression though, so not the biggest fan of that. I'm not super crazy about that expression, but I do like how he does have a more standard expression on the front here for the minifigure, which you can see in all its detail right here. Finally, there is another very strange exclusive version of the character, and this is the version of Bilbo that actually appeared as a Blu-ray DVD exclusive. It is so strange how they gave these so much effort in Blu-ray exclusives, but it is cool to get another outfit for him. This one is a bright blue coat, and unfortunately, because this is produced in a different factory, it is slightly lower quality than the rest of the minifigures. The hairpiece barely stays on. It like kind of just sits on his head there, and it just falls off super easily. He does have the same facial expressions in theory as the other minifigures, but since this is made in the other factory, the eyes are just a little bit larger, which I think even exaggerates the scared expression even more than it already should. It's not my favorite variant, and really weird that they chose this as the DVD exclusive figure when they could have made, I don't know, any other character that probably would have been more interesting than another outfit for Bilbo here, but it is still cool to get pretty much full coverage of all the outfits he possibly wears in the movies. But of course, the Bilbo minifigs don't stop there. He did go there and back again after all, and now we go back to the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy to take a look at this version of Bilbo who appears during his birthday party. This is the outfit that he wore when he disappeared on his 111th birthday, and as such, he has his dual molded legs. This is introduced for the newer style of hobbits. Really nice graphic design for the back, and it's really cool because they gave him his book, Shined by Bilbo Baggins, on the bottom there, and it literally says there and back again as a sticker inside the book, which is super nice. I think that's one of the coolest accessories to get. Would have been really cool if it was printed, but the stickers work just as fine, and they actually did make a new facial expression for him, showcasing his smirk on this side, which is maybe when he puts the ring on and disappears in front of everybody, and he's quite pleased with himself as he does that. We did get one final old Bilbo minifigure here, and I'm obscuring his face because he's about to jump scare you with a terrifying grimace, and that is when he was in Rivendell and made one last ploy to grab the ring from Frodo, and that was really showing the effects of the ring on him for many years. Of course, for accessories, I did include the Mithril outfit that he gives to Frodo that is in sticker form there, but it's a nice accessory for the character. He does have those dual molded legs, an exclusive torso, and then of course, he does have a much more calm expression on the other side, which matches the character quite well. And then they actually managed to color the hair in white there because in the time that he had spent without the ring, he already started aging very rapidly. So it is cool to be able to see them try to depict that utilizing two different shades of hair for the Lego minifigure here. While not technically the same type of hobbit as Frodo and his companions, Smeagol here is a very important halfling, so I've included him in this lineup. This is his pre-transformation look, exclusive to the gift with purchase set that came with the Shire, which is a really interesting gift with purchase scene. It's like one of the darkest scenes from Lord of the Rings depicted as a Lego set, featuring him and Deagle as, of course, they fight over the ring. Now, he does have a fishing rod as the accessory, and while this is before the corruption of the ring, I mean, if you look at that expression, he's already looking pretty corrupted. On the other side, he has a much more friendly face, and that was before he encountered the ring, and maybe was just a little bit nicer and less crazy before he kind of turns into Gollum as the movies progress. Now, it's interesting because they actually made an exclusive torso print for him, so that means that this minifigure is pretty much all around fully exclusive, torso and head, which is really nice to see. Of course, over the years, Smeagol would eventually turn into the creature known as Gollum, and Gollum here is depicted in his very first form that we saw in 2012. It's really interesting because this came out at the same time as the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles theme, which introduced a longer style of arm that's different from your standard skeleton arm. It's a very specialized piece and one that wouldn't last that long in the Lego portfolio, but it is cool to see that they gave these a little bit more extra effort, and one of the main benefits of this is that Smeagol could actually hold and put on the ring, sitting on top of his hand because the hands were shaped like regular Lego minifigure hands, something the newer version actually cannot do because it uses the standard skeleton arm. It was a very specialized mold to get for Gollum here, and it's actually really cool because they came up with a couple of different expressions for him to reflect the different personalities he has throughout the movies. So this one with the wider eyes is maybe more of the regular Smeagol persona, at least he's trying to be a little more friendly here. And then this version is definitely the Gollum persona. He looks way more sinister. He's got the eyes in a grimace. He's squinting. His mouth isn't as wide open. And I love how they gave him two different expressions to play around with. Of course, the figure is posable, so you can kind of move the arms up and down, and that is really nice. I also like how long the arms are because I feel like it matches his proportions really well in the movies. And that's something that the newer minifigure is unfortunate because I feel like in their quest to make it feel more like it fits within the LEGO system, you do lose out a little bit on how specialized this was because those longer arms definitely match Gollum's proportions really well. It would have been interesting to see a version of Gollum that maybe was standing up a little bit more if they were to try to remake the minifigure, but the remade one, while it is a new mold, they decided to pretty much just make it a very similar style as this figure. Here is the remade version of Gollum from the Barad-dûr set, and you'll notice a few key differences. First of all, to keep him in line with the rest of LEGO minifigure designs, they have removed his nose and not printed the pupils on the eyes there, instead just going for the white sclera in the eyes. They've also moved the different leg forward this time, so before it was his right leg that was forward, now it's the left leg, and they've actually made the loincloth a little bit more of a wider and larger element, although unfortunately, I feel like the printing on the loincloth has actually gotten a little bit worse. LEGO seemed to be a little bit better at printing on 3D surfaces back in the day as they do now, where if you look at the older minifigure, the printing very clearly continues from the back all the way to the legs there, whereas this one obviously cuts off a little bit too early to where it should be, which I think is a bit of a downgrade, especially when you compare the two different figures of the same character. If you were to ask me, I honestly much prefer the older version of Gollum. I feel like you lose a lot of the character detail here without the nose, with the shorter arms for skeletons. It almost kind of feels like a downgrade, and while I know why LEGO made the changes they did, obviously this feels like it fits within the LEGO style a lot more. I think the very specialized one that we got before was definitely a lot better than the one that we got now. Of course, with Smeagol comes Deagle, and Deagle here was also exclusive to the gift with purchase set. Unfortunately, they did not have enough budget to give him an exclusive torso, so while he does have a specialized outfit in the movie, they're just reusing the Samwise torso here, which I guess kind of works for the character. At least it's different than any of the other Hobbits that appeared in that set, because Sam had a different torso for that particular set, and it puts this piece still in production if they want to include Sam in some other sets, but it is a bit unfortunate because it just very clearly looks like he is using a piece that was made for Sam. I do like, however, that they did make a brand new facial expression for him that is exclusive to the character. And right here, you can see him smiling on one side, but I actually prefer him being the underwater version right there, where he's swimming underwater, he's catching a fish, and then he's trying to hold his breath right there, which is super scene specific, but it works very well. Our third to last Hobbit minifigure is not one of the major characters, but still a very important character in the overall lore of the movies, and that is Rosie Cotton, who eventually goes on to marry Sam, who apparently will be appearing in the Hunt for Gollum movie, or like maybe the other Lord of the Rings movie that Stephen Colbert is writing. Who really knows what's going on with the franchise right now? But this is actually a really well-produced minifigure. It is based off of her appearance in the Shire set, so she actually has her 2025 level of detailing. They have a dark blue skirt, dual molded legs, even though you can barely even see them underneath the skirt, and she does have a different style of hairpiece than almost all of the other Hobbits that we've looked at in this entire video. Now, on the back there, you can see she does have two different facial expressions. I believe that this is exclusive to the character. I don't remember. Maybe this is some Harry Potter minifigure head print or something, but even then, it still just works really well. I mean, I certainly think that it looks like it could have been made for the character, and even though the back of it is a very generic face print, I really like the smile on this side. That certainly feels very unique. Altogether, it's a really nice outfit and one that feels very different and distinct compared to all the other Hobbits we looked at on this list, so definitely a really good one to add to the collection. Next up, we have Farmer Odo Proudfoot, one of those background Hobbit characters here. He's very proud of his large feet, as the name suggests here. Now, this is a really nicely done minifigure. Again, not the most crazy in terms of detail, but it is still very well produced, and they did have this specialized head print for him, showcasing a smile, and then a little bit more of a serious expression on the other side right here. So altogether, pretty nicely done. The gray eyebrows and the dark tan hair do throw me off a little bit. It just feels like the coloration there doesn't quite match up, but everything else about the figure is really nice, and he does have the exclusive torso print as well. Now, Mrs. Proudfoot here is our final Hobbit minifigure, and this is arguably one of the most interesting because for her they introduced a brand new molded skirt element that we still have not seen on basically any other minifigure characters to date. This one is showcasing the kind of more traditional style of skirt that you would see around the Hobbiton area. Of course, she does have dual molded legs underneath, which again you cannot see under the skirt, but it is nice to see that. And then she also has a very angry expression right here as well, which I think fits the character quite well. So altogether, very nicely produced minifigure, exclusive torso print there too, and really cool to get a specialized molded piece for such a random one-off character. Alright, and with that, we have summed up our look at every single one of the Hobbit minifigures that we've gotten for Lord of the Rings. There have been a ton of characters here, and a lot of them are variations of the same characters. So a lot of Frodos, a lot of Sams, a lot of Bilbos especially. I think Bilbo takes the cake for the most amount of variations, which is really interesting because obviously Frodo is probably more important than Bilbo, but we get so many different versions of Bilbo throughout the years for the Hobbit movies as well as the old versions, and then Frodo as well gets a ton of different ones himself, plus a lot of Sams, and it's also cool to see some other Hobbit characters that they finally produced. When they made the Shire set, they gave us some of the Hobbit characters that are not just the main characters we see in the movies, which really adds a lot of diversity to the world and allows you to make your own Shire scenes, which is a really nice touch. Next up, we have made it to the countryside of New Zealand, and that means it's now time to take a look at all of the men who roam the land. The riders of Rohan, the men of Gondor, even some of the wizards we encounter amongst our travels are going to be covered in this section here. So, with the hobbits out of the way, we have to then move on over to Gandalf, of which there have been quite a few different variations over the years. This one appeared across 4 different sets, debuting in Gandalf Arrives from the 2012 Lord of the Rings lineup, and then appearing in 3 different Hobbit sets. A polybag featuring his time in Dol Guldur, as well as the Unexpected Journey, which was the Shire set from 2013, plus the final set being the Troll King Battle. This is one of the most common variations, but it's also the most kitted out. He has the wizard hat, the gray cape, and his staff, and the very interesting thing about the Gandalf minifigures is that there are so many of them, and they look very, very similar, but almost every single one has a slightly different facial expression. I'm going to take apart this one to really showcase what you have underneath the beard and the cloak here. So removing all the accessories, that's what the headprint looks like underneath, and I think it works pretty much okay for Gandalf as a character. You may notice the style of graphic design for Lord of the Rings characters is a little different than the modern LEGO minifigure design style, and it's really interesting seeing how LEGO minifigures have evolved over the years just by taking a look at how they depict different Lord of the Rings characters differently. Now, most notably, this version of Gandalf does not have an alternate facial expression, and that's because it would have been visible from the back of the hat. The ones that include his hair actually bothered to give him an alternate face expression, but one thing I really like that in 2012 and 2013, LEGO bothered to give us 2 different versions of his face print. One featuring a more standard and calm, serene face print, which is the one you see here, with no face print on the back because it would have been visible from the back of the head with the hat on, and then one that actually has an angry expression that we're going to take a look at in a second. Unfortunately, that is not something they really cared that much about for the modern remake for Lord of the Rings due to budget reasons, so we're going to get to those when we get to them. As far as the minifigure goes, I think it is a very nice depiction of the character. I think that using the classic LEGO wizard hat from Castle in gray actually works really well, and while I would love to see eventually some sort of specialized mold for his hat being used, I think this was pretty perfect for the older style of LEGO minifigures, and they did actually introduce that beard for the character. As the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit theme progressed into 2013, we got a couple more variations of Gandalf, specifically with his hair. Now, these minifigures are identical other than the fact that one of them has a cape and the other one doesn't. Technically, they are unique variants though, because the one without the cape goes in the smaller wizard battle set, depicting his fight with Saruman after he loses his cape. The most interesting thing about the minifigure, as I mentioned, is that for the version that just has the hair, he actually has an alternate expression. So You can see on the back of the head there, he has a very angry expression, and obviously all of that is just covered up by the beard, but they did attempt to make it look a little bit different from the front. So for instance, you can see he has the standard expression on the front, and then showcasing the angry expression here. Putting them side by side, you can see the very slight variations in the print style and the detailing, showing one of him being angrier and one being a little less angry. It's a very subtle change, and honestly, I'm kind of surprised LEGO did go and make the extra effort in 2013 to print on the back of the head just for the variation of Gandalf that had his hairpiece. For the hairpiece, they are just using a classic LEGO hairpiece that has been in production for a while at the time. They don't make this piece anymore, but it was notably used for Sensei Kaken from the Exoforce theme, another wise old man. There's actually one more Gandalf the Grey figure to take a look at before we move on to LEGO Dimensions and the Lord of the Rings relaunch, and that is this little game microfigure. This was exclusive to the LEGO Hobbit board game, and it's a really interesting one. It's back when LEGO board games were very prevalent across LEGO's portfolio, and they would regularly do licensed tie-ins like this one. It's actually a really well-produced minifigure. I think the color scheme is perfect. It's interesting how they went with light gray instead of dark gray for the actual coloration of the character, given that the minifigure does have a dark gray outfit for the rest of the sets, but I think it works better for the microfigure because if it was fully dark gray, I feel like the printing just wouldn't have been quite as clean. He does have a really funny way to depict the hat, just using a standard dish element with a spike on the top, which, I mean, works pretty well for the character, and removing that, you can see what the printing on the microfigure looks like. It's very similar to the Sensei Wu microfigure they did for the Ninjago board game, and it's just a really nice oddity to add to the collection that is technically an official minifigure. Can you spot the difference between this Gandalf and the one we started with? Well, this one was from LEGO Dimensions, and while at first glance it may seem identical to the early 2012 minifigure, this one actually had a pretty minor difference, and it's super interesting how, I guess clearly by 2015 when LEGO Dimensions released, the original Gandalf head was out of production, so they took the opportunity to give him a slightly different head. And this is something you were going to see across Gimli and Legolas as well from that wave of LEGO Dimensions. Removing the beard here, you'll notice that the printing is just a little bit more crisp, and it might not be immediately obvious until I actually do a side-by-side comparison with the original minifigure. So here you can see the graphic design they went with for LEGO Dimensions. And then I am going to grab the OG Gandalf minifigure and put them side by side so you can see the exact difference between them. It is very, very subtle, but it really boils down to the eyebrows. The original one had a lot more droopy eyebrows, and the one for LEGO Dimensions is a lot more standard for LEGO minifigure designs. They've also removed some of the wrinkles around the mouth. They've kind of brought it tighter into LEGO minifigure graphic design around that time. And again, it's really interesting because this feels a lot more like a standard modern LEGO minifigure face print, whereas this one is a bit more stylized from 2012, and that was back when they were still experimenting with slightly different minifigure stylization for graphic design of characters, and I really like how they were able to tighten that up for the 2015 version, which I personally much prefer. Otherwise, the graphic design on the minifigures are identical. The torso is the exact same one that he used in the original sets. It's just a very interesting oddity that, especially with the beard and the hat, you will really not notice any sort of difference. Lord of the Rings had a triumphant relaunch in 2023 with the release of the Rivendell set, and with that came a brand new Gandalf. This minifigure benefits from the innovations in minifigure design introduced in the years since Lord of the Rings' last introduction, which features the very first Gandalf minifigure that actually has a skirt element instead of legs, and this one is actually fully detailed to match the robes of the movie, which is a major upgrade. He also has a brand new style of cape. It's a lot more flexible and flowing compared to the original one, utilizing the slightly newer style of cape material, but unfortunately, when bringing this minifigure back, they didn't quite have the budget to give him a unique face of his own. So instead, they reused one from the LEGO Harry Potter theme, and honestly, that is my biggest issue with the minifigure, is that the face just really doesn't match Gandalf, and I guess with the beard on, you can kind of excuse it, which is what LEGO designers were hoping, but it also goes to show that how LEGO's priorities have changed when creating minifigures, and they seem to be a lot more minifigure element frame budget conscious nowadays than they even were back in 2012 and 2013, when back then, Not only did they have Gandalf have an exclusive face, but he had two exclusive faces, one with a very slight alternate expression just to alter the shape of his eyebrows if he's angry and has hair, and then in 2023 they didn't even quite have the budget to give him an exclusive face. Thankfully this would change going forwards, but it is still a little unfortunate that the very first relaunched Gandalf minifigure did just have this more generic face, and it definitely looks a little bit strange compared to the other Gandalf minifigures, because there is no semblance of the beard going up along the sides of his face, which just looks a little bit off. Otherwise though, the printing on this minifigure is just way better than the original one. The torso is very crisp, and it's so cool to get the skirt element that they introduced for LEGO Harry Potter in 2018 being brought into this 2023 minifigure. The shape of the cape is also unique. They gave him a specialized cut of fabric cape. It's not your standard minifig cape, and it's a lot more flexible, only attaching via one single neck hole to prevent it from getting wrinkled up by the beard. So in any sense of the word, this minifigure was a pretty major upgrade other than the facial expression, which thankfully they would fix just a couple years later. We got a much more proper Gandalf minifigure in 2025 when they released the Shire as a LEGO set for the Lord of the Rings relaunch theme. This one is identical to the one that came out in 2023, except it does include the option to have his hat or the hair, which is quite nice, the hairpiece being a slightly newer style of element that LEGO has been using over the past few years that I think is a lot better than the original slightly dated head sculpt, and most importantly, this one did have a brand new facial expression. So if we go ahead and remove the beard to showcase what that looks like, it just matches Gandalf so much better. And I'm really glad that this time they actually had the budget to give him a facial expression that's a lot more befitting of the character, and it just looks so much better for this minifigure. I feel like that was the only major thing a lot of fans complained about with the relaunch, and they decided to fix it. And thankfully there is no alternate face, just in case you do want to display him with the hat, because then that would show behind the hat. I'm really curious if eventually they are going to give him a slightly more movie-accurate hat sculpt instead of using the classic LEGO Witch and Wizard hat from all the way back in Classic Castle, because I feel like that is the only way they can make this minifigure feel even just a little bit more deluxe, but still, it is really, really nice to finally have pretty much the perfect version of Gandalf the Grey coming out in LEGOs. We got one final iteration of this character at around the same time when they released the Gandalf versus the Balrog Book Nook set. This one is identical to the one we just looked at, except he doesn't have a cape, because at that point in the scene he had dropped it. It also factors in his sword, which is a nice inclusion, and I really like how they're able to print on the back of the skirt, which is really special. Not every minifigure who has a skirt gets back and front skirt printing, but this just feels really deluxe as a minifigure, and I'm very happy they did that. Of course, now we have to take a look at Gandalf the White. Gandalf the Fool. This is our very first Gandalf the White minifigure from 2013. It only appeared in one set, the Battle at the Black Gate, and this minifigure is honestly perfect to me. I do not really know ways they could have made this minifigure better unless they printed the legs, and even then, it's just so crisp and clean as a minifigure, and a lot of that boils down to the specialized head sculpt that he received. In 2013, LEGO was a lot more willing to make very specialized molds like this one to depict characters in their different forms, and this is such a cool element. I love how closely it replicates the beard of the character from the movies, and they also reused a printed version of this for Saruman, which I think works totally well. Because he does have the hair, he has the alternate expression on the back of his head as well, and the only downside is he just has the standard, more rigid cloth cape, which means that with the hair over it, it does really get wrinkled up in the back. Still, I think that the graphic design of this minifigure is phenomenal. You have a really crisp and clean white torso with metallic silver detailing on the back and the front, and that hairpiece really sells it to me as being the perfect Gandalf the White. If only they were to keep using that piece. 2026 brings us our brand new Gandalf the White minifigure, and oh boy, this minifigure is pretty controversial. For starters, one thing that was pretty obvious to me is that they were never going to either bring back that older rubberized head sculpt, and they always were just going to depict it using existing pieces. It doesn't bother me quite as much, but it especially is unfortunate because knowing what we could have had and literally had over 10 years ago, it does feel like a downgrade not to give give him the specialized mold for his beard and the hair. Now, obviously, it doesn't really fit LEGO design standards nowadays, and LEGO has since moved away from giving minifigures those really specialized rubberized head sculpts, so I understand why they didn't do it, but it just feels like a bit of a downgrade. And if they never had made that piece, I don't think I would have complained. It just is unfortunate because we know how good we had it years ago, and this is a bit of a step back. The very strange choice here, and one that I actually don't really agree with, is the inclusion of tan on the torso. And this has been a pretty controversial topic. I've seen folks online saying that the tan is more movie accurate. I've seen folks online saying that it doesn't look quite right. And for me personally, I don't think it looks right for the character. Now, I actually got a chance to see some LEGO designer interviews, and a lot of times the designers actually were very proud of the fact that when they really closely studied the costume used for the movie, they actually noticed that there was a little bit of tan incorporated into that outfit, and that's why they wanted to add in those tan details. And I think that this is a difference between obviously, that was really well researched, and the LEGO designer put a lot of effort into noticing those details, which is commendable, but I feel like it just doesn't translate quite as well in minifigure form. Details like the tan embroidery on the robes are very, very fine detailing, and you don't really see it that obviously in the film. But on a LEGO minifigure, it just stands out so much more and feels very distracting, especially when you're so used to this character being on screen in these blinding white robes. I feel like it was a bit of a mistake to do this, and that's just my opinion. I know there's probably a lot of people who feel like this was the right way to do it, and they were trying to induce more detail into his outfit. It just almost feels over-detailed to me. Really, the only upside is that he does have printed legs now, which is really nice, but then unfortunately they also have that tan printing on the legs, so even then I feel like it's not quite perfect. The only major thing that I think is very cool about the minifigure that they bothered to do is they actually did a brand new print for the head, which is identical to the older Gandalf the White, or Gandalf the Grey head print, but he actually has the white beard printed on instead of the gray print. And I feel like it's that level of attention to detail, which is really nice. It's basically an identical print to the one that we got for Gandalf the Grey, but they bothered to reprint the beard on the side of his face in white instead of gray. And I feel like if LEGO was really trying to cost cut, they probably could have just used the same piece and it would have looked a little off with a bit of gray on the side, but I like that they went the extra detail to print the white beard and actually make it a brand new piece for the character. So that's at least nice, but honestly, I just much prefer the older minifigure, even though this one on paper is better with leg printing and a slightly more detailed and exclusive head print that goes to him. I would just use the new head print on the old minifigure and call it good. Maybe the new cape as well. On the topic of wizards, we have Radagast the Brown. Radagast was featured primarily in the Hobbit movie trilogy, where he had some very interesting creative choices done to him, like the inclusion of bird poop on the side of his head, which LEGO has actually printed. I do not know what Peter Jackson was cooking with that one. They made him into a very kooky character in the Hobbit movies, but this is a very accurate and faithful depiction of the character. He has a dark tan feather in his hat, which is one of the rarest colors of the feather to get, and speaking of the hat, it is a specialized molded rubberized hairpiece. This is unlike anything LEGO would do today. I'm sure that if they made the piece today, it would be a dual molded component instead of this rubberized design, and really goes to show the type of designs they were making for LEGO characters in general back in the day. With the cape and the specialized hat piece removed, you can see he does have an alternate expression, a very angry expression, which I don't really know fits the character that well. I feel like the very happy and calm expression on the back just fits him a lot better, but I do like the back printing. It's almost a shame it's obscured by the cape because you do have those really nice embroidered designs on the torso. Altogether, I do think this minifigure is produced very well. It's pretty much a perfect depiction of the character from the movies, which may or may not be everyone's favorite in terms of how he actually was depicted in the films, but you cannot deny this minifigure is very well done. And it's so interesting because I feel like this is a bit of a time capsule between what LEGO minifigure design looked like and how design standards have changed over time. Again, if LEGO were to have made this minifigure today, I think it would be very, very different, but I like how accurate they decided to make this minifigure compared to his depiction in the movie. Like, the beard is perfectly done, the hat is so unique in its shaping, and it just is such a specialized minifigure to get. Nowadays, I think it would be cool if they made maybe like a specialized staff mold. It's meant to represent his very intricate wood staff in the movie with a blue crystal at the end of it, which Gandalf later uses in the extended edition of Battle of the Five Armies, and here they just depict it with a regular staff with the glowing blue piece at the end, which I think is okay, but not quite what I would want to see for the level of detail. Still, it's a great minifigure, only missing leg printing, which was pretty rare back in the day. There is one more wizard to get to, and that is Saruman the White. Saruman here is depicted in a really nice detail, and this is the one that is exclusive to the Tower of Orthanc, which was Saruman's tower. This one does have the skirt element, which is just the standard Lego slope piece. This is before they invented the skirt piece in 2018 for the Harry Potter line, and as such, he stands a little bit taller than the standard minifigure. One really cool thing they did here is, just like Gandalf the White from that era, he does use that rubberized, very specialized beard element that fits in with the hair that actually has a print on the end, which Lego would literally never make today. It's not the kind of element that Lego would produce nowadays, but back in the day, it was a really cool way to depict characters in a very interesting and more movie-accurate light. If the minifigure were to come out today, I'm sure that they would just use a standard gray beard with white hair, which would look a lot worse than this, so I'm really happy they did bother to do this for the 2013 minifigure, because it was a different time in Lego minifigure design standards. The staff is also well done. I think they depicted it really nicely, and if you go ahead and remove the cape here, you can see what the printing looks like for the headpiece as well as on the back of the minifigure. One funny thing about it is that they released Count Dooku around the same time in 2013, and he used literally the same exact facial expression for both Count Dooku and Saruman, because they were both played by Christopher Lee, and honestly, I feel like the facial expression is so perfect. It just absolutely screams the character, and especially for its time, this is one of my all-time favorite Lego Lord of the Rings minifigures. I love how sinister his expression is underneath the beard. It just works so well for the character, and they did a really good job depicting him. It's really interesting because we haven't seen a modern remake of Saruman yet. I guess they just haven't really gotten around to depicting any of his scenes yet in Lego form during the modern relaunch of Lord of the Rings, so I'm really curious if one day, I'm sure they're going to build up to that, what he's actually going to look like. We got a slightly more pared down version of Saruman without his cape or the skirt piece being used for the Wizard Duel set, and it was actually really cool because around the same time Lego released the massive Tower of Orthanc, but they also released the very small and cheap Wizard Duel set so kids could get Saruman and Gandalf in slightly downgraded forms that they could just use to battle and play with each other, and I think that is a really nice touch, and I wish Lego would do more stuff like that nowadays. He does have no printing on the legs, which is a bit of a downgrade compared to the skirt piece, but it's still cool they were able to include him in a much cheaper set. I'm going to go ahead and round up the villainous human minifigures because there are a lot more heroic humans that we're going to get to in a second, and of course we have to take a look at Grima Wormtongue, who goes along Saruman very well. He's exclusive to the Tower of Orthanc set with his distinctive knife, and I think they were able to depict this minifigure really well. Again, the facial expression is very well done. They perfectly replicated the very pale skin tone he had, and I feel like if they were to release him today, they probably would use a slightly different coloration of skin tone because they've released so many more since then, but I think the tan coloration works quite well here. He does have an alternate expression there, which is more of a neutral look, which maybe showcases him creeping around the king, and then of course, he has some printing on the back. Again, that skin tone does not quite match the pale look in the movie. It's almost a little bit too jaundiced or yellowed, so they probably would do it differently, but other than that, the minifigure is really nicely done, especially for it. Our final villainous human is actually a stealth Peter Jackson minifigure. This is one of the pirates from the pirate vessel in Lord of the Rings that are briefly seen in Return of the King before their ship gets overrun by the ghosts, but they actually base the design of this particular one off of the Peter Jackson cameo in the movie, which is really cool. Obviously, I am not paying for the Peter Jackson minifigure, although I was second in the bidding war for that one, if you know elite ball knowledge about that minifigure being one of the most expensive minifigs ever sold, but it's so cool because, hey, I've got my Peter Jackson minifig at home here. It's actually really nicely done up. I think leg printing would have been nice, and if they were to release the minifigure today, they probably would do that, but he does have a very distinctive facial expression. You can see the back of it with the arrow that obviously, once that arrow is fired, he looks a lot more scared, especially after seeing the ghost army. Actually, this is more when he sees the ghost army charging at him, he gets very frightened, but I think it works very well for the character, and they did reuse a hairpiece that they introduced for the Hobbit. And it's an interesting one because it was specifically designed to hold a quiver, but this minifigure doesn't have a quiver, so it kind of awkwardly has a back gap there for the hair on the back. But I think it works okay for the character itself, especially given what they had to work with for the Lord of the Rings line and long hair being fitting very nicely into that fantasy air. But moving on from that to our more heroic humans here, we have our very first Strider variation of Aragorn. I've upgraded him with the newer style of sword that he got for the new Lord of the Rings sets. He just had a standard Lego castle sword back during his release around the 2012 and 2013 era, but overall, this rest of the minifigure is what you get. He, of course, is equipped with a torch to fend off the Nazgul, and I think this minifigure is just very nicely produced. You have some really great detailing for the print on the legs, the dark brown outfit, great minifigure expression as well for the detail on the head there. And then, of course, you can rotate that around to showcase what the headpiece looks like without the angry expression. I think this just fits the character very well, and both sides just really capture the likeness of the actor in the movie. So definitely a fan of how they pulled this one off, and we can move on to the next. Aragorn actually gets one more Ranger outfit, and that is the micro figure right here. This was exclusive to the Battle for Helm's Deep board game, and it's a really interesting one. You might be wondering why he's green, and the answer is because they wanted to depict all of the different characters in very bright and distinct colors in order to make them work better as game pieces. Now, he does have the standard printing that you would see from the minifigure basically replicated onto the torso of this green microfigure, which is quite interesting, and it's just a very nice little random oddity to add to the collection, and back when LEGO Game Synergy was at its strongest for board games integrating into licensing. Jumping forwards in time a little bit, here is our newer Strider version of Aragorn from the Rivendell set. Of course, he is holding the broken sword that was shattered, which is very cool because they actually made that a specific mold, and the tunic is a little bit more simplified. This is the casual outfit that he wore in Rivendell, which really goes to show that they wanted to pay a lot of close attention to the exact clothes that characters are wearing during specific scenes, which I really appreciate. It's a very simple minifigure. He is just using the same coloration and hairpiece there, but they have given him a new facial expression. One of them is angry, which you can see right here, like he is ready for battle, and then he has a much more serene and smiling one, which you can see right here as well with an eyebrow raised, which I think fits the character pretty well. I still honestly kind of prefer the one that we got in 2012 for the graphic design of the minifigure. I think that was a lot more accurate to his appearance in the movie and the facial expressions of the actor, but this is a lot more tied into the LEGO style, so to speak, which is something that the newer Lord of the Rings sets really try to prioritize. Going in chronological order, we flash back to 2013 to our exclusive Battle at the Black Gate version of Aragorn. I've also upgraded the sword for this minifigure, but again, the rest of the figure is the one that we got back in the day, and this one is really nice. He has a dual color cape, black on the back, dark red on the front, which really closely matches what you see in the movie, and he does have the printed Tree of Gondor on his chest there, which just looks really good. This is meant to depict his last final battle, his last stand against the armies of Mordor, and I think the minifigure just looks absolutely fantastic. It remains one of the all-time best LEGO Lord of the Rings minifigures, especially when you go ahead and remove the cape there, and we can see the full amount of detail factored into the minifigure. Beautiful printing with the dark blue design of the torso. The leg printing looks really good with the dark red and gold, and then you go to the back of the torso, which you don't even see, but they still had a lot of nice printing on the back there. So altogether, definitely one of the best produced minifigures of its time. Now this right here may be the best LEGO Lord of the Rings minifigure we have ever gotten. This is King Aragorn, only seen during the finale of Return of the King, where he is finally given his rightful crown in Minas Tirith, and as such he comes with the Minas Tirith set. They actually reproduced the old cape with the black on the back and dark red on the front, and it's so cool to get that be made again. I'm sure the cape is just slightly different from the older one, but it is the same style with the harder style of fabric as well, which is the only way they're able to do that dual color. He has arm printing for the very first time on any Lord of the Rings minifigure. He is so far the only Lord of the Rings figure to get arm printing. He does come with a printed breastplate as well, and full printing for the minifigure. Plus, the hairpiece is dual molded, showcasing the difference in how LEGO produces minifigure pieces now, where if this figure had come out in 2013, undoubtedly it would have been a single color and they would have just printed the crown, which definitely would have worn off over time. The only downside is that since the hair kind of goes down past the minifigure head and the cape is so stiff with the armor, it does kind of tend to conflict a little bit. If you push the head all the way down, the hairpiece is liable to fall off, and that is the only minor downside, although I don't really know how they could have fixed that problem, so it is just kind of a little quirk about the minifigure. That being said, with everything removed, he does still get an exclusive torso print underneath there, which just looks so good. I mean, that is absolutely phenomenal. Here you can see with everything removed, the better detail on the arms there with amazing printing on the arms, and he does even have a really nice detail on the back as well with the tunic and the belt. So altogether, this is easily one of the best LEGO minifigures of all time. I think it probably might be one of my all-time favorite LEGO minifigures ever, and I'm talking about in the entire history of LEGO. Obviously, I am a huge Lord of the Rings fan. I've seen the extended editions of the movies literally more times than I can count, probably double digits at this point. So I am a die-hard Lord of the Rings fan. Obviously, I am biased here when I say that, but I do think that this is one of the all-time greatest LEGO minifigures. Honestly, impressive design. It's just so cool to see this, and one of the all-time favorites. So definitely a huge fan of this one, and I hope that we'll see more minifigs like this. And speaking of kings, though, we now have to turn our attention to Theoden, king of the Rohirrim. This is the King of Rohan, and I love the way they depicted this character. Before the relaunch of Lord of the Rings, this was my all-time favorite Lord of the Rings minifigure design, and obviously that was for good reason. One thing they did that was super cool was give them exclusive printed helmets, and you can literally see the horse molded into the top of the helmet there, which is a really nice touch. Nowadays, I wonder if LEGO would actually dual mold the top crown piece if they were to produce this minifigure again. We're all waiting for them to do a new Helm's Deep, and I would imagine they're probably going to get to that in like a couple of years, especially because they just retired the Lion Knight's castle, which was another big gray castle. So I'm sure we're going to get something like Rohan and Edoras first and some other stuff, but again, until they do that, this is our only version of King Theoden in his battle armor, and he is spectacular. The printed shield is amazing, the printed breastplate is so cool, the actual facial expression matches the character so well. There are very few things to complain about with this minifigure, and I just think it is one of the all-time greats. One of the cool things is that underneath the armor, he actually does have the accurate torso print as well, which he does appear in the movie in specific scenes where he doesn't have his full breastplate on. So you can use this minifigure in a couple of different ways, and he does have an alternate head expression as well. Altogether, big fan of this minifigure. I feel like this was kind of the peak of minifigure design back in 2012. Like, they could not do much better than this, and it really goes to show how much love they decided to put into the Lord of the Rings lineup here to really make the minifigures the best they possibly could. So, an all-time great minifigure, one of my favorites, and one that is honestly unbeaten until they release a new version, which hopefully could be even better than this, but only time will tell when we're going to get that. We have one of the coolest microfigures here, and that is King Theoden in a pearl gold sculpt. This came out obviously back when LEGO's mix for pearl gold was very different, and this is the one that is prone to cracks and the like, so definitely be careful if you do own this microfigure, but I think it looks so spectacular. There's something about that older blend of pearl gold that they used for stuff like the Golden Ninja and Ninjago and C-3PO back in the day that did crack a lot, but just looked so cool in minifigure form, and this is no exception. It's really cool to get him in this fully golden look, whereas the minifigure obviously that we just looked at was a lot more muted in the color scheme with the dark browns and the dark red for the arms. I feel like this feels a lot more special as an actual golden microfigure, which makes him be one of the most important characters that you can use in the board game, which I've actually played quite a few times very recently, and I will say that board game is a ton of fun. I would actually highly recommend playing it if you do happen to own it.
Oi, oi, Sauron done nicked me kingdom and got me bloody banished.
Wrong franchise, but right actor. Next up, we have Éomer, played by Karl Urban in the Lord of the Rings movies, and this is another one of my all-time favorite Lord of the Rings minifigures, especially because of the insane level of detail they factored in here. This was present in the Uruk-hai army set, which was basically a battle pack for Uruk-hai and an expansion pack for Helm's Deep, and he just looks absolutely amazing. He's using the same helmet mold as King Theoden, but this one actually does have some pretty intricate different printing, like the dark brown on the back and then the golden horse on the top there, as well as the golden printing on the sides, plus the same shield. Removing all of the accessories, we can take a look at what this minifigure looks like underneath the cape and all of the details, and it is very nicely done. He does have an exclusive head print there that I believe they've only basically used for this character, which is really nice to see. The torso print is very nicely done as well. It's a specialized torso print they made for the character, and on the back there, he has a very angry expression, which I think is very emblematic of the super stylized faces LEGO is doing for Lord of the Rings characters back in 2012 and 2013, which I'm not the biggest fan of. I like that the more modern minifigures kind of tone this down a little bit more, but I still think it's very well done, and altogether just a really nicely produced minifigure. He does have the same leg printing as his King Theoden does, but I think that actually works pretty well for the character. It kind of makes them all feel like part of the same faction, and he does have that dual rubberized spear element they introduced in collectible minifigures and still continue to use a little bit to this day. And overall, just a very nicely produced minifigure, and one that I'm sure Castle fans absolutely love. Finally, our last Rohan minifigure is a generic Rohan soldier, and despite this being a generic character, I appreciate the level of detail and effort that went into it. He's also using the same helmet, but this time it's not printed in plain silver, which I think makes sense for a more generic soldier, and this one is an archer because there's a quiver on the back. The detail on the torso is spectacular. I love how they were able to give this one a uniquely detailed torso despite the fact that it is just kind of your generic army builder minifigure, and he does come in a battle pack, so back in the day, this was a really cool minifigure to be able to amass. The only downside is this one doesn't have leg printing. I feel like they could have used the exact same leg printing they used on the other Rohan characters for this one. It totally would have worked out, so not really sure why they did not do that, but other than that, I'm a fan of this minifigure. He does have an alternate expression as well, showing even the random side characters and generic army troopers did have a lot of effort put into them, and altogether just very nicely produced, especially with that helmet piece being a real standout for the character with the horse molded into the helmet. The LEGO Helm's Deep board game also gave us a generic soldier, and this is obviously meant to depict some of the knights featured in Helm's Deep, like the horsemen of Rohan and the men of Edoras, and I think this works really well. The sand green for this microfigure is actually not distracting in the slightest. I think it's actually a really good color to use for this character. I think it fits the style very well, and this one did come in multiples, so it was really cool to be able to amass them like an army. It doesn't necessarily match any minifigure that we actually got as a physical minifigure, which is interesting because we did get some generic soldiers, but it doesn't quite match the torso printing here. I guess the scale printing on the outfit is supposed to match up to the standard generic soldier that we got in the battle pack, but even then, it's just not quite a one-to-one depiction like some of the other characters, which I actually like how this kind of stands as its own thing. It's quite unfortunate, but this is our only physical LEGO figure version of Éowyn, who's a pretty major character throughout the movies. I imagine that's going to change very quickly. There is a rumored Oliphant set coming out next January, and if she's not in that, I'm sure they're going to do Edoras or something like that at some point, if not next year immediately, so I'm sure that this is going to change very quickly, but as of right now, the only depiction we got of her was exclusive to the Battle for Helm's Deep board game, which we talked about earlier in this video. It's a really interesting minifigure design, and it shows what she might have looked like as a standard minifigure should they have produced her, and if you're wondering why it is the lighter blue color, it's because they wanted to craft them all in very distinct colors to make them stand out on the board game playing field and actually have them act as board game chips. It's a nice minifigure design, and it's a cool piece to add to my collection, but very frustrating how this is literally the only representation she gets in physical LEGO forms. I don't know why, there's literally like 2 female Lord of the Rings characters, and I can't believe LEGO just decided not to make her. But now we must turn our eye to Denethor, Steward of Gondor. This is our exclusive minifigure who appears in the brand new Minas Tirith set, and it is pretty much the perfect depiction of the character. I think that maybe a way to make the minifigure design even funnier is if they actually had berry juice smeared on his lips, or like the chicken juice that he had when he was eating during the battle. I think that would have been a funny LEGO detail that I'm honestly kind of surprised they didn't do. I feel like that's a very LEGO thing to do, but I actually kind of like how they kept this one a lot more serious, and they chose to just depict him very accurately to the movie, where he does have the scared expression, which I will be displaying. I feel like that really kind of fits the character quite well, but then on the other side, he has a more calm and stern expression. I honestly feel like maybe they could have done something angrier. I don't know. I feel like I like the expressions they used, but they're almost a little muted compared to how crazy his expressions could have been. I feel like they could have even amped up like the vileness and the scowl on his face even more and made him look even more sinister. And I think that if he were to have come out in 2012, 2013, especially when you look at the crazy facial expressions some of the other characters on this list have from that early era of LEGO, he would have had that. But nowadays, they did try to kind of keep it a little bit more muted for the character to just fit in the standard LEGO style. Otherwise, though, the printing is really nice. I love the metallic silver detail on it. You can see that it is very nicely produced. Not the most exciting minifigure or the craziest outfit, but one that fits the character very. Of course, going in order of who Denethor prefers, we have his son Boromir here. This is our very first version of Boromir from 2012. I have upgraded his sword to match the one that he actually has specially made for him in the newer sets, but otherwise this is the standard minifigure that we got back in the day, and for a 2012 minifigure, this was produced really nicely. I'm really glad we got the Fellowship scattered across all the different 2012 LEGO Lord of the Rings sets. This one came in the Mines of Moria. And again, that facial expression is very nicely done. I feel like it is super accurate to the character. It's really interesting how they chose to use a slightly different design for the shield piece there, instead of using the standard flat shield element that they actually did have in production around this time. They chose to go for this one with a stud in the center from the CMF series, and I imagine that was specifically because they wanted to depict the circle in the center of the shield, which is really interesting, a cool choice to make him feel a little bit different from the other minifigures that came out around that time. He does have an angry expression on the back, which I think also fits the character and actor quite well. Pretty simple printing on the back there, but that's alright because he does have the dark brown cape. And while I will say I do prefer the modern version of the minifigure that we're about to see, I just feel like they did the detail a little bit better on that one. This was still really good for its time, and I definitely think they did a good job at depicting the minifigure, especially trying to make him feel a little bit different with that slightly different shield, and the hairpiece is basically perfect for the character. Now this is an even better version of the character. Here is the new version of Boromir that we got back in 2023 for the Rivendell set. One very cool thing they did for that set was give everybody their exclusive sword molds that came in a weapon pack, which allowed LEGO to make a variety of different sword molds matching the designs of the weapons in the movies without spending that much budget because they were all produced as part of one set of molds. This is a really nicely done character. I love how he has kind of a smile on his face here, which we actually do often see in the movies. I feel like, unlike some of the other characters, which I feel like had cheerful or happy expressions that don't really match them, this one actually does match the character quite well. And then, of course, going ahead and removing the cape, we can take a look at the alternate expression there, which is a lot more serious, and I think that fits the character really well. I mean, there's something about the design of that minifigure print that I feel matches the character in the movie so perfectly with the actor. And then, of course, you have a very simple printing on the back of the torso, but I think it works out quite nice. Obviously, it's covered by the cape, but even that is done a little bit nicer than the original. So altogether, I feel like this is just a straight upgrade over the original minifigure in almost every single way. Unlike some of the modern redesigns where there are some aspects of the old minifigures that I like a little bit better and some where I prefer the newer ones, this just feels like an update in every single sense of the word, which I really appreciate, and goes to show how much LEGO has improved and changed over the years. And now is a chance for Faramir, Captain of Gondor, to show his quality. And it is a very well-produced minifigure. I would in fact say this minifigure is very high quality. It came out in 2026, this year, for the release of the new Minas Tirith set, and interestingly they gave him the older style of sword for the minifigure, which is the 2013 Castle Sword, which I guess fits the design of the weapon a little bit better than the much longer sword that a lot of the other characters use. He does have a dark orange hairpiece for him, which is actually a LEGO Friends element for Nova that they recolored for him, which I think fits the character really well. I'm really glad they chose to give him this specialized hairpiece, and it just looks so good on the minifigure. Of course, the printing of the character is done really nicely. You've got a really nice design for the cape as well in dark green, and then removing the cape, we can take a look at what the minifigure looks like with an angry expression on one side on the back there, and then of course, you can see on the back of the torso print the breastplate that he has kind of continuing onto the back with the white tree of Gondor printed on the front of the chest. Altogether, really nicely produced minifigure. Again, another one of the highlights from a set that features pretty much all amazing minifigures, and this one is no different. It is one of my all-time favorites to get from those movies, and it's really cool to see. Technically, this is also an exclusive Lord of the Rings minifigure, and this is the statue from the Minas Tirith set. It's meant to represent a previous king of men, and I find it really interesting how they actually use the Sensei Wu beard, which I don't really know fits the Lord of the Rings world very well. I feel like that beard was very much intended to be made for a Japanese style of setting, and I almost wish they went with just the regular Gandalf the Whitebeard instead, or just something a bit more generic than that very specialized piece, but I guess it is interesting as a statue. One very cool thing they did here is that despite the fact that obviously there's no printing or anything on the minifigure, they recolored the hair and crown piece in white specifically for the statue, which is just goes to show that there was an extra level of budget and care put into depicting these minifigures in their actual forms to make them accurate to the movies. We get 2 copies of these in the set, which is very cool, really nice, so I can put one on display for my minifigure wall here, and it's just a cool addition to the men collection. And finally, summing up the Lord of the Rings movies before we move on to the Hobbit, here we have one of the ghostly undead warriors. This is the King of the Dead, and this is one of the coolest LEGO minifigures of all time. Obviously, I upgraded the sword there, but the rest of the minifigure is the exact same that we got back in the original set for the pirate ship. They recolored the original Lego castle crown in the sand green color, which I think fits the character really nicely. It's just so well produced. The dark red cape is really nice. The head glows in the dark, and they actually produced glow-in-the-dark components for the minifigure heads here to give them a very eerie glow. And I just think it works so well. There's an alternate expression as well, and even with the cape removed, you can see the level of detail factored into the side and back of the minifigure. I am so curious what this minifigure would look like produced today, and maybe if we're lucky, they're going to throw him into the Oliphant set that's coming out in January. I feel like today they probably would give him maybe transparent arms, and there probably is a way to depict the printing on the torso better, which is still a little bit simplified compared to the more modern LEGO minifigure designs. So altogether, great minifigure, one of the coolest ones that we got. I still think they could do this minifigure a little bit better today. Maybe they could give him maybe an even more accurate crown mold, but I guess only time will tell, and we'll have to see if LEGO will ever decide to revisit it. But for now, it's still a phenomenally produced minifigure, and there's still 2 more to go that we got from that set for this army. We have kind of a general here for the Army of the Dead, and this one does have an exclusive torso print, which is so cool to see. All of them do share the same leg print, but I think that works out totally fine for these characters. They recolored the pith helmet in sand green, or the kind of standard LEGO Knights helmet that we're very used to seeing, which is very cool. And of course, he does have a sand green cape, which is one of the only times we've ever gotten that for a LEGO minifigure. Glow-in-the-dark headpiece as well. And this one is super cool because, again, they actually match up very closely to actual designs that you can see from the movies. So if you do go closely in the movies and watch them, I very recently rewatched the extended editions of all of the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit trilogy to actually prepare for making this video. You can see the amount of detail they have factored in there, and it is so cool because this actually matches up with one of the random background ghosts that they have, which is just super cool. Definitely a big fan of how they pulled this off. With the glow-in-the-dark color scheme, I like the plate armor as well. Like, the more vertical style of armor feels very unique compared to our standard LEGO castle minifigures, and it just makes this one stand out even more. We've got our final Ghost Warrior here, and this one does have an exclusive torso as well. The headpiece is the same, but one really cool thing they did is that because the glow-in-the-dark head they use there is dual-sided, this one does have a very different, distinct facial expression. He has a brown beard as opposed to the open mouth of the other one, and I really appreciate that they did that to make them feel like distinct characters while saving a little bit on production budget to not have to make 3 different glow-in-the-dark heads. Showcasing the back of the torso print without the cape. I like how the armor almost looks like a rib cage, but also does factor in to the standard armor design of the character. And altogether, it is so cool that we got 3 very distinct variations of Ghost Army minifigures for just one single set in 2013. But now it's time to move over to the Hobbit trilogy, and our first partial man character here is Bjorn the Bear. This was a changeling who could transform from man to bear and back and forth, and while unfortunately we did not ever get his bear form in a set, I guess you could use like a regular Lego City bear to depict that, we did get this very specialized minifigure being made specifically for that character. One of the most interesting things about it is that while it's meant to sort of look like a hairpiece that goes over a standard minifigure head, you'll notice that when I remove this entire piece is just an actual full-on molded element, and it's almost just meant to look like there is a face underneath, which is not something that Lego would probably do today. I'm sure they would do a specialized hairpiece if they were to make it today over a regular minifigure head, but it is really cool to see the amount of effort they put into crafting it and printing the minifigure head design on the character here. It's super specialized, it just works so well for the character. The printing on the torso is also very nicely done. You can see the open chest there, and while the character didn't have that much to do in the movies, even in the extended editions, he didn't really do much. It is still really cool to see Lego put that much effort into a side character like. Of course, one of the most important human characters in the Hobbit trilogy was Bard the Bowman, and this one is a very unique variant. It's very slightly different than the other variation of the minifigure that we got that had some dirt on his face. This one does not have dirt printed on his face, otherwise it is the same minifigure. He's using a black recolor of the Qui-Gon Jinn hairpiece, which they later would use for Ninjago Hands of Time to depict Acronix's hair, and it is really nicely done as a minifigure. I like the graphic design for the character. It just matches up very nicely to what we actually see in the movies, and then he has a more neutral expression on the other side of the head here, which I think fits the character quite well, and you can see that they did a lot of effort into depicting the angry side as well as the neutral side, which I think probably would be toned down a little bit if they were to make this minifigure today, but for its time, I think it matches the graphic design quite. This right here, though, is an exclusive variation of the character depicting him during the attack of Smaug, and this one is literally the identical minifigure to the previous one. Obviously, I've armed him with the black spring-loaded missile, which was meant to depict the black arrow that you could use to pierce the scales of Smaug, and the other side of the head is identical to the happy expression he had on the other minifigure, but this one actually has some dirt stains on the face there, and it is so interesting how they decided to make this a unique minifigure, and I'm really interested in the fact that they didn't choose to make a new expression for the back there, but they just chose to kind of print dirt over the existing angry expression they made for him. It's very rare for Lego nowadays to give us such a scene-specific, specialized variation of a character like this, but it's cool that they invested that much effort and detail back in the day, and again, really goes to show the amount of love Lego gave their licensed themes back. One of the most interesting Lego Lord of the Rings and Hobbit minifigures is this Comic-Con exclusive piece. This was an early pre-release meant to promote the Battle of the Five Armies that came out during San Diego Comic-Con 2014, and the minifigure is not actually exclusive. Unlike every other Comic-Con exclusive, these minifigures were just previews of the upcoming minifigures that would be appearing in the January sets. So we got one for Azog, who we're going to take a look at later on when we take a look at the orcs and villains, but this one right here is meant to be our 2015 version of Bard the Bowman, depicted in minifigure form for The Hobbit, which is so interesting to see. Opening up the packaging here, you'll notice that really the only exclusive piece about it is this piece of cardboard right here that actually opens up to showcase the massive minifigure here, as well as Smaug the dragon, and then you can see some of the details on the back. I'm gonna be honest, as an exclusive minifigure, I feel like they could have picked like anyone a little more interesting than Bard the Bowman. I feel like getting maybe Thorin Oakenshield and his battle armor would have been more interesting, or something like maybe an exclusive minifigure for those sets. But again, it is cool to get it as a Comic-Con exclusive, but now let's take a closer look at the actual figure. So here is Bard the Bowman in his outfit from the Battle of the Five Armies. He's wearing a dark blue coat, and you can see that they have pretty much the same facial expression that we got for the other minifigure. This one just has a brand new outfit with printed legs and printing on the torso. Now going over to the back, he has the regular angry expression that we saw, no dirt on his face this time, and altogether, I think this outfit is a little bit cooler than the other one. I think the dark blue just feels a bit more regal, a little bit better in terms of the minifigure design, especially because he eventually went on to lead some of the humans in that town, so it is cool to see that depiction of the character here, and it matches the movie really nicely. I love the fine detail they factored into the minifigure as well, with the metallic chain armor there, the detailing detailing on the torso and legs is just super cool to see. So altogether, definitely one of the better produced minifigures that we got for a character like this. Even though, again, the Hobbit movies are not very well liked, it is still cool to see LEGO put that much effort into this mini. Despite the fact that Bard has like 3 or 4 kids, we only ever got a minifigure of Bane, son of Bard, and this is because, of course, he uses him as kind of the stand to launch his arrow to defeat Smaug, which is why this particular kid was very important in the movie, and he does have these short legs. He kind of was a bit more of a teenager, or maybe a very young teen, or almost a teenager in the movie. I feel like today they would have done him with mid-legs, but I think the short legs fit the character well enough. This one is featuring his outfit that we see him in for the second movie. He does have some dirt on his face, showcasing the battle with Smaug, and then a standard smile on the other side of the face as well. So a very basic minifigure, not the most exciting thing, but still nice to get a pretty obscure character like this one. And then here we have one of the strangest and rarest LEGO Hobbit and Lord of the Rings minifigures, because this is Bane, son of Bard, in an exclusive outfit. This is a slightly different outfit that matches one that he wears elsewhere in the film, with an exclusive head print as well. And this was only found in the Hobbit Blu-ray for Battle of the Five Armies. I don't really understand why this minifigure exists. It's such a weird one to get for the exclusive Blu-ray of The Hobbit. I feel like there are so many other characters that would have been more interesting to get as an exclusive minifigure, but they went with a different version of Bane here. I don't know what kid was wanting to buy the Hobbit Blu-ray and said, oh my goodness, look at that exclusive version of Bard's son. Let me buy this now. So I don't really know who this is for, but it is still cool to get him. One very strange thing about it is that, again, you'll notice he does have 2 different facial expressions, but because this was made in a slightly different minifigure factory, the hair is super loose, it falls off really easily, which is a bit unfortunate, and the graphic design is a little bit different compared to your standard minifigure, where the eyes are just printed a little bit too large. So it almost feels like a knockoff, even though it isn't, because it was an official LEGO minifigure just produced as a Blu-ray exclusive and in a different factory, which is why it just is produced very strangely. It's the same style and design and quality as the collectible minifigures of that time, which did feel a little bit cheaper than your standard minifigure. As we close out our human characters, we have one second to last figure here, which is the Master of Lake Town, everyone's favorite character from the Hobbit movies. This one, despite the fact that he probably was not a very liked character, is incredibly, almost insanely well produced, to the point where I don't think LEGO would ever make this minifigure again, certainly not the way they did it there, and I'm astounded at the level of effort that went into this. He has a specially molded headpiece here. This one is a hard plastic component, but it is fully exclusively printed. It's not dual molded because LEGO was not dual molding pieces at the time. Nowadays, if they were to make him, I'm sure it would be dual molded, but you have just literally painted hat with a dark red top, dark tan fur, hair underneath, a feather sticking on the top, dual color cape for purple and red. I mean, LEGO went all out on this random minifigure that, again, just did not have that much of an important role in the story. He mostly was just there for comic relief, and it is so interesting how much effort they went into making the minifigure. Now, obviously, this was made during concept art phases when the characters were still being conceptualized, and I guess LEGO figured he might be a more important character than he actually was, but it's so interesting to see the level of detail that went into something like this, and especially because LEGO would never produce a minifigure like this one today. I like how he has a lot more sinister of an expression on one side of the head versus the other where he looks a little bit more harmless, and it's interesting because they made him but not his assistant, who definitely had a lot more screen time, I will say, especially in that third movie, but it is still cool to see so much detail factored into the character. And finally, our last human character is the Lake Town Guard. I've given him the printed shield that we saw on the side of the boat, although they didn't officially wield these as shields. I just think it kind of complements the minifigure really nicely, but altogether this is a really nice minifigure design. Again, despite the fact that these were pretty nothing characters and didn't really show up that much in the movie, they went all out on the minifigure design, giving them specially printed components. All that metallic silver is printed, the dark tan is really specially made, even the brown hair on the side, or I guess the sides of the helmet straps, are printed, so everything about the minifigure is insanely well produced. Like the brown on the side is printed, the silver is printed, there's a symbol on the top that's printed. It's all meant to kind of resemble like a fish on the top of the heads, which is a really cool character design. And then you can see the difference in the printing, so the torso and legs are printed on the front and the back there, so altogether very nicely produced, especially for a random one-off minifigure. No sort of alternate expression here, but overall just really nice and a really interesting minifigure to round up our look at all of the human characters of Lord of the Rings. And finally, we have the Soldiers of Gondor. There are 4 of them included in the brand new Minas Tirith set. Each of them has a different headpiece, but we'll take a look at one of them to start and then all of them in a little bit. These are incredibly well produced, and really the only major complaint that I have about these minifigures that I see a lot of people talking about online is the shape of the shields, which admittedly are just not right. These shields they have in the movies are a lot more rectangular, and LEGO actually has produced a rectangular shield piece. The only problem is that piece is long discontinued. It last appeared in some of the LEGO Knights Kingdom 2 sets almost 20 years ago. So obviously LEGO does not have that element anymore, and they just didn't quite have enough budget to make a brand new shield piece just for this set, so they went ahead and used the standard LEGO Castle shield, which I think works okay. I can kind of see what they were getting at, and if you kind of ignore the pointed bottom, you can pretend that the top part is right, but again, if you just look at the movies, it just doesn't quite match up. So that is a little bit unfortunate. I feel like LEGO probably had the budget, or they could have found the budget to make a rectangular shield piece that I'm sure they could have used outside of just Lord of the Rings. So it's a bit unfortunate to see that, but it is what it is. Now the cool thing is that a lot of these minifigures use some pretty special head prints. Like this one was exclusive to the UCS Death Star, yes, the $1,000 LEGO set. It was exclusive to Director Krennic, and now you can actually see it on a generic soldier. And again, that's one thing I want to point out. I love the fact that these Soldiers of Gondor use head prints that actually feel like they totally belong in the world of Lord of the Rings. And we're going to take a look at that for some of the other characters in a little bit. But again, really nice choices there. The printing on the breastplate is so nice. I love the very subtle metallic white tree of Gondor printed on it. And then of course you have the torsos underneath, which also have that same printing. So altogether, really cool to get. And then we also got a specialized new helmet mold there, which again, if they had the budget for only one or the other, it makes sense that we would get a specialized helmet mold as opposed to a helmet mold and a shield. So I get it, if it makes sense for the budget, but again, would have been nice to get that specialized shield. There are a few more of them. This one right here is utilizing another LEGO Star Wars face print, which again, works really nicely for Soldiers of Gondor. I think this one is just a really good one. It just fits so well in the fantasy-inspired lineup. It almost feels like these were made for the minifigures, which is really cool to see. It's not every day that you have licensed minifigures that truly feel like they fit in the world. Again, this one as well, maybe a little bit on the younger side compared to what I would expect to see from a soldier, but I think it fits quite nicely, especially under the helmet there. That is nice, and that is a slightly different dark tan skin tone as well, so there is a little bit of diversity in the ranks. And then we have one final one right here, and this one is probably the one that I think fits the least, especially because he has kind of like one raised eyebrow. I don't know about that one, and the smile on the other hand I'm not sure fits perfectly either, so this is the only one I'm a little iffy about. But as terms of all the other ones, I just really like how much attention to detail they put into crafting these soldiers, and I think that overall they're just really smart choices being made for all the different head prints, and I'm glad they don't all have the same head print either. We have some final surprise official LEGO Lord of the Rings minifigures to take a look at here, and these are some of the strangest. I grouped these together with the Men and Wizards category because they are meant to depict Lord of the Rings fans who do not exist in the world of Middle-earth. They could be you or me wearing a Lord of the Rings t-shirt, but these are official LEGO minifigures. So what's the story behind these? Well, the Minifigure Factory is a station that exists at LEGO stores around the world, mostly just the big flagship LEGO stores where you can design your own minifigure prints. But very often, to coincide with the release of brand new LEGO sets, they release a number of new minifigures that tie into the release of those sets. Now, the very frustrating thing is that there is no calendar of release of these. They do not announce them. They randomly have the digital designs appear to be printed, and as soon as they're gone, usually in about a week or so, you can really never get them again unless they bring them back. And for a while, I thought my Lord of the Rings minifigure collection would always be incomplete because I did not realize they did these for Barad-dûr back in 2025 or 2024, and I completely missed out on them. I did not manage to get any. Thankfully, they actually brought back the 2024 Barad-dûr ones for Minas Tirith. For some reason, they did not make new ones. They brought back those old ones, instead of bringing back the ones from 2025, which are more specifically tied to the Hobbiton area. So let's take a look at them right now. You could obtain these online as well, which is where I got mine, but those are a little bit more expensive, as well as the fact that you can actually get a few less printed elements in them, so it's better to go to the store to get them. But I found the printing online is a bit more consistent than what you can do in personal LEGO flagship stores. So our first one here says, I love Hobbiton, which is quite nice. That's kind of where the journey begins. We have one of the same exact design that says, love Middle Earth, which makes a lot of sense. And unfortunately, they did not print the backs of these. So if you look at the back of the torsos there, they are just kind of a basic t-shirt design, which I feel like they could have done a slightly better design there, but it is cool to get that in kind of a Middle Earth themed font. And then finally, you have someone in a black shirt that says, I love Mordor. And this is a really cool one to get. Obviously, this was very closely tied in to the release of Barad-dûr, and I love how the t-shirt is black this time instead of the white t-shirt, although I will say, because they can only print these on white minifigure torsos, it definitely doesn't look great to have it just be on a white torso and then they tried to print a black t-shirt on it. And then, of course, the printing is just pad printed. It's not the official type of LEGO printing, so it definitely feels a little bit lower quality compared to a lot of other LEGO minifigures, but these are technically official. Now we have one more right here, and that one says the Precious for the one ring going around it. This is really like a Gollum shirt there, and I find this one funny because this one does have the matching back design where the S's continue all the way back. I also love how Precious, like as a word, is trademarked, but the trademark is at the back there, so they were allowed to do it on the front of the shirt without putting the TM, and then it just has to continue on to the back with the TM at the end, which is very funny. So this one is definitely a lot more interesting than the simple like I love Hobbiton or I love Middle Earth ones. And then finally we have one last one that's probably my favorite, and that's because this is actually a graphic design from the set, which is a map of Middle-earth showcasing the Eye of Sauron and the Tower of Barad-dûr. And on the back there it says, one does not simply walk into Mordor. And I think that's really cool. Again, it's really special to get these as like specialized fan t-shirt designs of LEGO Lord of the Rings minifigures. And while I think it would have been cool to get official Lord of the Rings designs printed on minifigure torsos instead of just these, I feel like since the quality isn't great, this is a good compromise for those people who don't really care about adding these to their collection. Then you can just go ahead and not collect these, but if you really want to be technically a full completionist, then in my opinion you technically do need to own all of these because they are official LEGO Lord of the Rings minifigure designs that you can print on the minifigure factory. So I've managed to collect every single one of them, and I definitely would recommend get them while you can, because once they disappear, they could disappear literally forever, and there's very little documentation about them online, meaning that these are probably some of the technical rarest LEGO Lord of the Rings minifigures ever that nobody even talks about. But there was even one more batch, because aside from this batch that came out in 2024 and later came back just this month for 2026 release of Minas Tirith, they also made a completely fresh set for the Shire. So let's see. Our next minifigure design exclusive minifigure was actually produced with the release of the Shire, and that's why they all have Shire specific torsos on the back and the front printed on them. So this one says no admittance except for party business, and of course that is a reference to the sign on Bilbo's door, and that is really cool to see. I've given them the plain white heads and plain white legs to match the prototype minifigure designs that we almost always see in confidential LEGO prototypes. I felt like that matches the figures quite well, but this one is a black shirt printed on white, which I don't know was the best idea, especially because, again, the print can get offset a lot. So on my copy here, you can see this print is just a little offset on this side compared to the other one. It's a very subtle detail, but again, it shows that these are just a little bit lower quality than some other LEGO minifigures. Produced the same minifigure but with a white torso, and I feel like that one just works a lot better than the other one. I do like how the Lord of the Rings text feels like it's a very Lord of the Rings inspired font, and that actually I believe is an official Lord of the Rings font, or at least it's meant to look like it, so it looks really good. You have the nice text on the back, and obviously a white t-shirt on a white torso is going to show up a lot better for minifigures from the minifigure factory like this, so this is a good one to get for the collection, and definitely one that I think works a lot better than the black. There were actually 3 other minifigures released around the same time, also tying into the birthday. They say 111 today in different shirt colors. This is the dark red one, and then you can see a BB logo on the back for Bilbo Baggins. Obviously, these are not meant to fit in the Lord of the Rings universe, but they are meant to be fans of Lord of the Rings wearing outfits, so I guess that kind of works for what they are trying to get across here. I think the designs are nice, and they definitely do fit the very Lord of the Rings colors, at least for the dark red one here. We then have a green shirt one here, which makes sense because the Shire, of course, is filled with vegetation. I think this minifigure is pretty nicely produced. Again, they have the identical designs. Everything about them is the same, except the color of the text in the shirt is different, but you can see this one has the yellow text on the green shirt, which is a little bright, but honestly, I think it's okay for what it is. Finally, you have this spring yellowish green or this bright light yellow torso here, and I don't know if I really love this one. I feel like it's a bit too gaudy. The strange thing about the torsos as well, for all the ones done in this style, is that you actually have the shoulders exposed, so it's almost meant to be, I don't really know, like a tank top, but no, it's white skin, so it's meant to be a white top to the shirt. I'm not really sure what they're kind of getting at with the white shoulders there. I guess it's meant to lead into the white sleeves, showcasing that this is either on a mannequin or maybe that like this is a shirt with white sleeves and it kind of goes up on the top and this is just a trapezoidal design in the center. It's a strange design. I'm not really sure if I love what they're trying to go for here. I can kind of see it, but still a little bit odd to get for a minifigure print design. I think it's still cool that they did these for Lord of the Rings, but I also feel like if you're going to give us exclusive Lord of the Rings minifigure prints for the minifigure factory, I almost would have preferred them to maybe go for something that could have been seen in universe, like a civilian design, but I guess these are meant to be for fans to create for themselves, so I don't know. I guess it makes sense. It's very set specific for Bilbo's birthday, which is nice because it was meant to coincide with the release of the set, but also not nice because these were only available for such a limited window of time, and if you missed out on them, they are basically impossible to find again. And with that, we have summed up our look at every single one of the men, wizards, and at least partial men characters of Lord of the Rings. Really cool lineup of characters here, and kind of unfortunate that our only female character, Éowyn, is just a little board game microfigure, but I guess there aren't that many Lord of the Rings characters that are female to begin with. It definitely is a very male-dominated spread here, and that will change a little bit as we go into some of the other characters, but it is cool to see just how much effort was put into every single one of the minifigures of this lineup. Especially getting so many new characters in the Lord of the Rings relaunch has been amazing. I love 99% of the new designs of the characters. As I mentioned, Gandalf the White, a little bit mixed on that one, but altogether, a really cool lineup of minifigures, and definitely shows that for every single race of characters in the Lord of the Rings Middle-earth world, they still put an equal amount of effort into every single one of them, especially back in the day in 2012 and 2013 when getting specialized, super specialized, molded, rubberized components like Radagast's hat and hair, or the Master of Lake Town's hat and hair, and the helmets that we got for the Rohan soldiers. Just amazing elements that LEGO probably wouldn't produce like that today, especially with the advent of dual molding, and I'm working on a video that's going to go more in depth into what I mean by that, but altogether, I hope you enjoyed this look at the men and wizards of LEGO Lord of the Rings. After leaving the safety of the Shire, the next part of our quest brings us to the forests of New Zealand, where you might be able to see some elves lurking within Mirkwood or even Rivendell. So now, let's turn away from the hobbits and take a look at all of the elf characters from Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. Now, technically in order chronologically for when the movies are supposed to take place, this is our very first Legolas minifigure. It's the outfit that he wore throughout the Hobbit trilogy, and obviously that was a Peter Jackson invention to give the movies a bit more padding and to introduce characters that you would care about from Lord of the Rings into those movies, and regardless of what you think about those choices, I will say that this minifigure is actually really nicely produced. He is using that standard Legolas hairpiece, showing the hair going back around the side, and he does have the same expression that he is actually using across some of the other minifigures, but I love the pearl gold arms. I feel like that is a really nice touch there, and then of course you have your standard Legolas more serious expression on the back, which is something I do feel like is missing from the more modern version, which is reusing an existing head. It's well produced, I like the overall minifigure design, but there is just something very iconic about his original outfit. Of course, we have to start off with Legolas, who is pretty much the most prominent elf character from Middle-earth. This is his very first minifigure that we got in 2012, and there's actually a few very specific variations of the character that are important to go into right now. This was the first one, and it was back in a time when LEGO Lord of the Rings was doing some more stylized minifigure faces. It's really interesting because I feel like this affects the elves the most, where you can clearly see the expressions they were giving them were a lot more stylized and specific than your standard LEGO minifigures. Even the more neutral expression that he has right here really showcases the cheek lines and the eyebrows and even the expression of the mouth are just a little outside your normal LEGO minifigure style. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think it is cool that they were putting that much effort into depicting the characters differently, but it also does mean that it feels a little bit outside the realm of standard LEGO, which is why future minifigures would fix this. Here's a look at what the back of the torso looks like right there, and the minifigure is done up in olive green with the light gray legs, which is quite iconic for the character. I feel like it does fit the outfit very well. We'd get a better version of this in the future, but as a start, this one is still pretty good. We now have our smallest version of Legolas yet, and that is the board game microfigure from the Battle for Helm's Deep. This is done up in lime green to make him very easy to spot on the playing field, but altogether the print quality is quite nice, and I miss the days when we would get tie-in board games for the biggest IPs coming out with LEGO around the time, because they would give us very interesting microfigures like these. I think the microfigure is well done, his facial expression is pretty much the same as we see on the minifigures, and I like the little inclusion of the hair around the top there, plus the printed chest, although lime is maybe a little bit too gaudy in my opinion. Now you might be wondering, what's the difference between this minifigure right here and the last one I just showed? Well, the difference is in the face. This is the 2015 LEGO Dimensions version of Legolas, and because it had been a year since we got the last one, they actually managed to redesign the face, giving him a design style that is a lot closer to your standard LEGO minifigure graphic design, and it's really interesting that they bothered to do that. The back of the face still has this angry expression, but the actual curvature of the mouth is a lot more in line with what you'd expect to see from standard LEGO minifigures, and the front of the face is completely redesigned, showcasing slightly lighter cheek lines and a more defined eyebrow characteristic that really makes him feel like he fits a lot better into the standard LEGO portfolio. And I really appreciate that they managed to do that, because this minifigure feels a lot more in line to what we're used to. Although there are some aspects of the extreme stylization we would see across the Lord of the Rings minifigure lineup that I actually do like, and we'll get into that in a little bit. The most modern version of Legolas, however, came in the Rivendell set. This one was part of the big relaunch of Lord of the Rings in 2023, and clearly a lot of effort was put into the character. First of all, they introduced a brand new dual molded head sculpt, and this is very indicative of how LEGO has changed over the years in terms of how they produce their minifigures. While the previous piece was one single piece of solid plastic, and it was not flexible, the ears were also painted on, meaning that after a lot of wear, the ears would scuff off. This brand new piece is actually dual molded, where the rubberized hair piece is fully rubber, meaning you can kind of move the hair back and forth, but the inside part that attaches to the minifigure head is in hard plastic, and the ears are actually molded into the minifigure, meaning that you can do all sorts of interesting expressions and poses with the character. Like here, you can have him kind of looking off to the side, having the hair drape around his shoulder there, which is a really cool touch, while still keeping it fully consistent and strongly adhered to the head because it is attached by hard plastic. It's a really cool way to demonstrate how much LEGO has changed over the years, and another major update is that he does have dual molded legs now. So instead of having just the leg print printed on the standard legs, they actually managed to do a dual molded piece for him, which does feel extra special. Obviously, the rest of the outfit is similar to the original one he had, although they have upgraded the printing in almost every single way. The only major downside is that they just didn't have enough budget to give him an exclusive face. So instead, he uses the Han Solo face, which I guess kinda works for Legolas. I feel like the cheek lines being there are really what they wanted to emphasize for the character, but I don't know, I still feel like it was a lot better to get a more specialized face made for him, and hopefully in the new Oliphant set that's rumored to come out this January, we'll be getting a new version of Legolas that hopefully has his own unique face, because that was a major complaint about the relaunch, is that a lot of the characters used pre-existing generic LEGO faces, and I'm sure that's something they're going to be looking to fix going forwards into the future. Continuing with the Hobbit, this is Legolas's father, King Thranduil, who is the ruler of the Mirkwood Elves. It is one of the most intricate and detailed elf minifigures we have ever gotten, and I absolutely love this design. If they were to produce this minifigure today, undoubtedly the crown and hair would be a dual molded component, maybe even triple molded, so when they have the molded ears as well as the different color on the crown, but back then they weren't really dual molding anything, so this was just a specialized wig made for this character. It is remarkably well done, but it also shows some of the limitations in having these specialized wigs like this. The print sometimes doesn't fully line up for the ears, sometimes you can see some of it bleeding over, and I definitely do think they would absolutely just dual or triple mold this today, but it is really cool how the entire thing is fully flexible, and it's such a unique piece for the character. He does have an angry expression on the back, which is pretty stylized, but I think actually does reflect the character in the movies quite well, who was very, very stern, and I am excited to see him on screen again for the newer Lord of the Rings movies, which they have confirmed he is returning into the role. On the back of the torso there, you can see some metallic silver and golden printing, which looks pretty good, continuing from the front part of the torso, but of course all of that is covered by the dark red cape, which also does sit very regally on this character. This was one of the coolest elf designs, and regardless of the fact that the Hobbit movies were not very well received, and I think the inclusion of the Mirkwood elves being like that important and adding so much to the plot was a little questionable, it is really cool to see this minifigure be produced, and a really exciting one that I think is only going to get more popular, especially as he appears in more films. In 2013, we got a special exclusive preview of what the Mirkwood elves may look like in the next Hobbit movie, which is really interesting, going to show that the Lego sets were designed when clearly The Hobbit was supposed to be only 2 movies and not 3, so they kind of probably figured that this was going to be in the first movie. Still, it's really interesting seeing how the designs evolved over time from concept art to today. This is a Mirkwood elf general here, and this one is using the standard elf hair, but in brown instead of the yellow that we have seen so far. It does utilize a face print that they designed for the elves. They used it for Haldir, and they went on to use this for pretty much all the generic elves, which I think makes sense. It really does feel elf-like with the angry face on one side and a more serious and stern expression on the other. And while this minifigure design is just alright in my opinion, I feel like the plain legs do take away a lot from making the figure feel special. It was cool to get as our very first Mirkwood elf minifigure. Here was the second preview minifigure we got in 2012 for the second Hobbit movie, but it released around the time of the first one, and this is a very drunk elf guard, and I find it so funny how they actually kind of printed on the face that clearly that goblet he has in his hand is not just holding some water, I will say that. And that was something that they factored into the Hobbit movies, where these elves were a little bit wilder, they were a bit looser than the more regal elves we were used to, and they wanted to have that come across in the toys and marketing, and that's why this guard here, who was supposed to guard the keys, but instead let Bilbo steal the keys from him, is clearly a little inebriated by the facial expression, which is very funny. I feel like they haven't really explicitly done like a drunk minifigure before, but this clearly is what it's supposed to represent. Of course, he does have a much more serious face on the other side, and obviously that might be when he puts the glass down, but I love to display him with this face because it's so specific for the type of character they were making. He has printed legs showcasing the keys on the legs, which was also really special for the figure, and they went all out on designing this character that really is just a one-off background character, which I actually really appreciate. The next year, though, we would get our proper Mirkwood elves with the release of the second Hobbit movie, and this is one of the more generic soldiers. You can see here that this one does have that standard elf hair, plus a bow and arrow as the accessory, which many of them used. On the back of the torso, you can see he has an angry expression. They're all using the same face there, and then of course you do have the printing on the back, and I really love this minifigure design. I love the fact that they also included an army for you to be able to army build, which was a very cool thing that Lord of the Rings did back in the day. And these designs are really nice. The leaf printing, the embroidery of the outfit, the dark brown and dark green just goes so well together, and I really love the amount of effort they put into crafting these figures. Officially, there was another variation of the minifigure. This one was without the hairpiece, but it had a dark green hood instead. Everything else about it is identical, so we can move on. Here is our most kitted out and upgraded version of the Mirkwood elf. They're wielding a shield, which you can actually get from the Mirkwood elf army set, and then of course a bow and arrow plus a quiver on the back, which unfortunately doesn't work with the elf hair, which is why this one had to wear the dark green hood. Otherwise, it is just the identical minifigure to the other army builders that we saw earlier, but it's still a really cool design to get, and I'm definitely really pleased that they were able to put so much effort into crafting all of these characters, especially with the shields completing the look. Tauriel here is a pretty controversial addition to the Hobbit trilogy, but they depicted her minifigure really nicely. She's wielding a dagger initially made for the Prince of Persia line that I'm surprised was still around by the time they produced these sets, but it feels very ornate and elven, so I'm really glad they were able to use it. She is, like all the other elves, using the same hairpiece. This one goes just behind the back, whereas the newer one has some hair going forwards over the shoulders, and overall the design is really nice. It feels like it fits within the Mirkwood elf realm. She's actually using the same leg printing as the regular Mirkwood elves, but a different torso print to showcase the outfit she had in the movie, plus the exclusive head print showcasing an angry face on one side and a more serene expression on the other, with the freckles factored into the print, which is a really nice touch. Given her prominence in the movies, we also received another outfit for Tauriel. This one is in bright green, and it showcases just a slightly different outfit that she wore throughout the movies. Exclusive printed legs, the same headpiece as the previous one, but again, a nicely produced minifigure. Nothing super crazy going on with the design here, but I think it is very well done. You have some very simple lines on the back, which are basically just covered up by the hair, and then of course you do have the belt detailing as well with the green and brown printing. So altogether, really nicely done minifigure, and we can move on. One of the most important elf characters we see throughout The Lord of the Rings is Elrond, and this one is his very first chronological appearance. From the flashback sequence that started the very first Lord of the Rings movie, this is Elrond as seen in his battle against Sauron in the early days of the Lord of the Rings universe. He has a short cape, which is interesting. I guess he is wearing it short because he is using it for battle. I've gone ahead and given him a more modern accessory there to fit the sword he had at that point in the movie, but he had a longer accessory for the actual set, and this is very interesting because this one was actually a minifigure that was a video game pre-order exclusive. If you pre-ordered the LEGO Lord of the Rings video game, you would receive this as your free gift as a polybag, and he was exclusive to that. Because of that, though, this minifigure was produced in a different factory than normal LEGO minifigures, and that's why the printing does feel a little off compared to your standard graphic design, and it's a perfect example of the very stylized designs that they would get back in the day for the early Lord of the Rings sets, where you have a very angry expression on one side that I really don't think LEGO would do today. It's almost a little bit too extreme. It harkens back to the insane expressions they did for LEGO Exoforce, and it is interesting seeing that they tried that out for the LEGO Lord of the Rings theme before deciding to keep them a lot more in line with your standard LEGO minifigures. But here, it almost looks like he is yelling attack or shouting a battle cry, going into battle, which is cool, but definitely not the most LEGO style that I would expect to see out of a regular minifigure. Chronologically speaking, the next Elrond here is the appearance that he had in the Hobbit movies, and this is during his fight with Saruman and Gandalf against the Nazgul in Dol Guldur, which is a very interesting sequence they factored into those Hobbit movies. It's really interesting because they introduced a specially molded hairpiece specifically for Elrond, and this one does showcase his crown around his head, which is really cool how they printed that on. Obviously, it is a rubberized piece with golden printing on it, so you can kind of see some of the dark brown underneath, and again, it's not something that LEGO would ever produce today. It would certainly be a dual or triple molded component if they wanted to recreate it with the crown molded in, but it is really cool to see kind of back then how LEGO was tackling their own minifigure designs. Now, going on to the back here, you can see he is featuring a pearl gold torso, and I feel like this angry expression in particular really looks like Hugo Weaving. I feel like that captures the actor's likeness really well, so I'm definitely a big fan of that and how that looks for the minifigure. The smile, I think, works okay for the character, but that other expression is just so perfect for the character, and he has one of the most unique colors of capes yet, an olive green full color of cape, and honestly, I don't think any other minifigure had a cape in this color, so it is really cool to be able to see that. Finally, we've arrived at the main version of Elrond that we see throughout the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and this came in the original Rivendell set, not the new remake, but the first one from 2013. He does have that crown molded into the head there that is printed with silver print on for the silver crown, which again, doesn't look the best on the dark brown rubberized surface, but I still do think it was a nice attempt for LEGO to mold in exclusive detail for some of these characters, something that is pretty rare for them to do nowadays. And one of the coolest things about it is that this minifigure has the dual color cape. So on one side, it is dark red, and on the other side you have a lighter color. The unfortunate thing is, though, that because the hairpiece goes around the cape, it's really easy for this to get wrinkled up, as you can see here, and that is a bit unfortunate. I don't really know how they could have prevented that, but it still is very, very cool to see. And on the back, it's quite nice because you've got a really nice intricate design, even continuing onto the back of the minifigure. And then of course on the front, you have his standard robe. So altogether, very nicely produced. Finally, here is our modern Elrond, and this one did come in the 2023 relaunch of Lord of the Rings in the Rivendell set. And I'm gonna be completely honest, I feel like this minifigure is actually a bit of a downgrade compared to the original one. For one, he doesn't have the cape factored in, and they didn't even bother to print on the back of the skirt, which they are able to do, but most importantly, the crown is no longer actually molded into the hair because they wanted to reuse the existing elf headpiece they made for that set. They just chose to use that and then print the crown on his head, which is just a lot less impressive than having it as an actual piece going around the hair. I also think that the expressions just aren't quite right. I feel like they nailed the likeness of the actor beforehand, and I don't love the fact that he doesn't really have a serious expression that is more neutral. Like, the smile here I think works all right for the character. It's not perfect, but it works okay. But the serious expression almost is a little bit too quirky. Like, it feels like there's way too much going on there with the squint and one eye is kind of eyebrow raised and his mouth is at an angle, versus I would like just a much more neutral expression that we saw in the original design. Now, one thing I do really like is that the robes are fully upgraded. Since this was a modern minifigure, they were able to use the more modern skirt component, which they introduced for Harry Potter in 2018, showcasing the metallic copper and metallic silver designs on the skirt. And on the back of the torso, it is super simple, so it's a nice looking minifigure, but I feel like the expression on the face just isn't quite right for the character, which is weird because I feel like they totally nailed it basically over 10 years prior. Next up, for some of the most important elves, we have Arwen, and this is chronologically the first outfit we actually see her in that has been made in minifigure form, and also is the very first minifigure of her produced. She had an exclusive hairpiece when she came out, which is really interesting that they dedicated that amount of effort and budget into just this one character, showcasing the ears painted on the rubberized sculpt there, and having the hair go over the shoulders, which is more accurate to the movie. She had an exclusive face print as well, plus using the slope element as the dress, which makes sense because that was before they had the skirt piece. If you want to see the details of the head underneath, you can see that's what it looks like with the hair removed. And then, of course, the alternate expression looking a little bit more annoyed or maybe in combat mode, but I much prefer this one that I feel really does just fit the look and feel of the character and how she appears in the actual movies, and those cheek lines and everything just really work very well, especially with the coloration being sand blue. We would get better Arwen minifigures though in the future, so let's take a look at those now. Here's our latest version of Arwen from the Fellowship of the Ring, featured in the 2023 relaunch of the theme. This one is featuring a proper skirt element and showcases the nighttime robes that she had during the particular scenes with Aragorn in the very first movie, and I think it's just produced really well. You have a little bit of subtle printing on the back of the gown there that just shows the extra layer of detail they bothered to include for this minifigure. She has a book accessory that doesn't have any exclusive prints or stickers, but still a nice one to get for the character. And then of course she has that new dual molded hairpiece, which just feels like it fits a lot better for a modern Lego piece, but unfortunately loses some of the curls that the original minifigure had because that hairpiece was specifically made for her, versus this one being a more generic element. Speaking of generic elements, the head print is also just a repeating face. This is a face print that they've used for a number of characters. I believe they use it for Princess Leia, which is quite funny because she is in a white robe, so swap the hairpiece and it kind of looks very similar to some other Lego minifigures. But I do think that the dress makes up for it. It is very nicely done. You can see the metallic silver printing for the necklace around the neck, which looks so good. So definitely a big fan of how they pulled off this minifigure, and I really just wish they were able to give her an exclusive head print because that's definitely something that I feel elevated the original figure. It's almost like the perfect version of the minifigure is once again taking the torso and legs from the new one and then using the hairpiece and the head from the older version, which really goes to show the pros and cons and how Lego does design nowadays. And finally, here is the most recent version of Arwen, and this one is decked out in the regalia that she wore during Aragorn's crowning ceremony in the Return of the King, exclusive to the Minas Tirith set. As such, she has this really beautiful fabric banner that is meant to represent the White Tree of Gondor, and she is the third Lord of the Rings minifigure ever to include arm printing, which is really special. Unfortunately, I feel like this minifigure is missing a lot of detail on the skirt, which is completely unprinted. and honestly that feels a little bit lame to me, the fact that the minifigure is so detailed. For the front half of the figure, I mean, this is absolutely packed full of amazing detail for the gown, for the printing on the arms, but then they just decided not to print the skirt entirely, and that feels a little bit strange to me, as if the juxtaposition between the first half and the bottom half just isn't quite right. Still, the minifigure is done really nicely, and thankfully she does have an exclusive printed head this time, which is different and unique compared to the original one she came with, showcasing the silver crown that she wore. So everything about the minifigure is so well produced from the waist up, but I feel like they could have at least printed some gown lines or dress lines, or had some of the detail continue down on the skirt, and I honestly maybe would have traded the minifigure printed arms just to make the entire figure feel a bit more consistent in its printing from top to bottom, but it is what it is. It is very nice to get those printed arms regardless, so I can see why the designer went for it. It just feels a little bit odd to get such a detailed torso and then plain legs on the bottom. Our next crucial elf character here is Haldir, who very notably went to the aid of the humans in the battle for Helm's Deep, and that is where he lost his life in that battle. Now, this is really nicely produced from the 2012 wave of LEGO Lord of the Rings, and you can see he is just using the standard elf hairpiece that they had at that time. I've upgraded his sword there, but everything else about the minifigure is standard, and one really cool thing is that when you look at the amount of detail on the torso, I just love how in certain reflections of the light, you can actually see some of the metallic designs reflecting off the light of the torso. So you can see there, it's not just metallic gold, there's a bit of metallic copper, there's a bit of silver embroidered on there. It even continues onto the back design with the cape removed. So altogether, definitely a very well-produced minifigure, absolutely one of the standouts of the Battle for Helm's Deep, and one of the best ones that we got from the original elf lineup. We also got a smaller microfigure version of Haldir from the LEGO Lord of the Rings Battle for Helm's Deep board game, and this is a really cool piece. For starters, I love that they depicted him in dark red. I feel like that just matches the character really well, and as we just saw, he had a dark red cape, so this is pretty perfect. Unlike some of the other microfigures that had very gaudy color schemes to make them obvious to stand out, I'm glad they went with dark red instead of something like bright red, which they very easily could have done to make him pop out for young kids. The facial design and the printing on the torso does match up really nicely with the figure, and overall it's a cool one to add to the collection. One of the most important elf characters in all of the Lord of the Rings lore is Galadriel, and I'm really surprised it took getting her in a Hobbit set for us to get our only minifigure of this character so far. She utilizes the same exact headpiece as Elrond, but this one is in pearl gold rubberized material, which is really nice, printed silver crown and printed ears, which again will tend to fade off a little bit over time and wear, but it absolutely makes up for it in the amazing detail. I love how the cape is produced here. It's a sparkly cape showcasing her reflecting in the light. It's just so well done, and that same exact design is replicated onto the torso as well. If you go ahead and remove the head here so you can see all of the detail for the cape and the actual head print, you can see she does have a specialized head print for the character. They did a really nice job depicting her because on the back, she has the white eyes showcasing, I guess, this power-up that she has in the Hobbit movies. I don't think that was ever supposed to be like a power-up in the Lord of the Rings films. It was meant to represent what she could be should she take control of the One Ring. But then the Hobbit was like, this is her special attack, which is very funny. But I think it is really cool. I love that you do have that alternate usage for the character in case you do want to depict her like that. I think that if LEGO were to redo this minifigure in the future, which I'm sure they will, they could even produce two different versions of the character, like one in white for normal, and then I could see them doing like a green and pale one for the spectral attack version of her. But I think that to keep it as terms of one minifigure here, I'm really glad they factored that into the design, and it does look really good. The cape absolutely sells the minifigure, the dress does as well, and altogether, I definitely think this is one of the all-time best LEGO Lord of the Rings minifigures. Sure, there are some technical limitations of its time. It was before dual molding, so that's why they had to print the crown and the ears, as well as the skirt, just using the standard slope element instead of the newer dress piece they introduced a few years later, but altogether, it is just really well done, and I definitely love the way they put this together. Finally, we have a few generic elves from the Rivendell set. This is the male one, and he does have that newer style of elf hairpiece, which is quite nice to see. You can see he's wielding a new specialized sword component, and this one is honestly a little bit less interesting than the female one because he is just using plain dark gray legs versus the female one, which we're about to see that actually has a little bit more printing. He does have the infamous Shang-Chi / Batman head. I guess it was introduced for Kazuda Xiono from Star Wars Resistance, and they've used it for so many characters since. But honestly, I guess I can kind of see it. I feel like it looks a little elf-like with how serene and neutral the front expression is, so I can see why they went with it, but it is just funny in retrospect, especially now, seeing that that is just the Batman face now, and they've used it for a regular elf. The female one here definitely stands out a lot more, especially because of that amazing printed dress element. I love the metallic silver detailing going alongside the dress, and unlike some other characters we saw on this list, this random side character even got printing on the back of the dress, continuing the pattern down, which is just so nice to see. I feel like it really just makes the minifigure feel a lot more deluxe. She is using a pre-existing headpiece. This is the one that they use for Hermione, and that's why you've got the freckles there and the slightly angry expression on the back, but I think it fits the elves well enough, and I'm not expecting them to make a brand new elf print for just generic background elves in Rivendell, so I think this was pretty much the best they could do with pre-existing minifigure pieces. Finally, to sum up the elf category, we have 4 different elf statues from Rivendell, and obviously these are all just variations using different minifigure pieces, but officially they are 4 distinct minifigures because you have one with long hair going over the front of the elf and then legs, one with the same hair and skirt, and then one with the hair going back behind the elf and legs, and then one of that with the skirt. So there are technically 4 different ones. One really cool thing they've done is to include 2 different face prints here, so you can make the statues feel different, so every single one of them does feel pretty unique, such as, for instance, you have a more happy smile on one side, and then you have a more stern and commanding face for the other side, so you can really choose which way you want your statues to look. I honestly find it impressive that they made a brand new face print specifically for elf characters here. I'm honestly kind of surprised they did it for the statues and not for the other ones and didn't just make the faces of the statues plain, but I appreciate the amount of detail that went into crafting these, and it definitely makes the scene come alive a little bit more, and as well as including a lot more minifigures in that set than actually are officially advertised. And with that, we have summed up our look at every single one of the elf minifigures from LEGO Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. I love how diverse this spread was, as compared to The Hobbits, which really just try to focus on a few main characters. We get so many different elves in generic outfits and more specialized gear, and of course there are a few different outfits for some of the main characters like Legolas, but we also get a lot of variety in terms of the character breadth and depth, and probably one of the most diverse spreads in terms of both male and female characters here as well. So it really helps flesh out the world. I love a lot of the design aspects of most of these minifigures, and I can't wait to see what else they've got cooking for the future in the Lord of the Rings theme. Emerging from the forest, we've made our way to some of the geysers in the mountains of New Zealand, and of course that means next up we have to cover the dwarves of Middle-earth. So let's jump into that category right now. Here is the insane dwarf minifigure lineup. 99% of these coming from the Hobbit movies, where they had some of the most unique head sculpts and molds ever made for LEGO minifigures. They went all out when making these, and let's jump in right now, but I think we have to start with Gimli. Starting off with Gimli, this is the very first Gimli minifigure we ever received as part of the Lord of the Rings theme. One of the things that I really want to point out here is that LEGO Lord of the Rings in 2012 had a bit of a different style for minifigure graphic design, and it's really interesting seeing them take a few risks and go against the standard LEGO design, making the features of the characters a bit more stylized, having the emotions and the anger of the characters be a little bit more extreme compared to your standard LEGO minifigures. And I think that resulted in mixed results. Some of them are really cool and I feel like they totally look like the actors they're based on, and other times it feels like they're way too exaggerated and it just doesn't feel like the LEGO style. And Gimli is a really interesting example of this, where right now you can see that it is a really nicely done minifigure, but I want to start by taking a look at the headpiece underneath. And If you manage to remove the beard here, we can take a closer look at the head. It is very funny how he is just like clean shaven underneath there. Like there's just no beard at all. He's just very baby faced, which is very funny. But he does have his expression there with the weathered eyes. He kind of looks aged on that design. And on the back here, you can see with all the stuff removed, he has a very interesting like grimace expression. And again, that really does feel like a little bit pushing the expression a bit farther beyond what we would normally tend to see for standard LEGO graphic design. And it's not something that you normally would notice unless you've been collecting literally thousands of minifigures your entire life like me, but it is something I did want to point out because I do find that interesting about the character. And it is especially interesting because when we take a look at a future minifigure, they actually updated the expression to keep it a bit more in line with what we're used to from LEGO. Aside from the expression though, I think the minifigure is very well done. I'm really not seeing the Gimli face underneath the beard here for this one. With the beard on, it looks a lot more like Gimli, and he does have the very large beard element that is specialized for him that covers basically the entire torso, and they actually made a new helmet for him. So this is really intricately printed, and one of my favorite things about it is that as we rotate the minifigure onto the back, you can actually see they molded in some of that back detail there, and it really feels specially molded where you have the ridges on the back of the helmet literally molded in, but then unfortunately some of the printing has scuffed off over time, and that was a downside to some of the helmets like this. They did tend to have print that's scuffed up, and LEGO has changed the way they print on pieces like this, and they've modified that to prevent those issues, but that also results in slightly less accurate printing, which we're going to take a look at when we look at the modern Gimli minifigure. This one though is printing that continues all the way to the top of the head. It's printed on angled surfaces, which is really interesting, and that helmet is just so well done. It's a really underrated LEGO helmet element in my opinion. The Battle for Helm's Deep board game from the LEGO Games lineup gave us our smallest version of Gimli yet. This one is not going to need to have a lot of jumping to do to see over the Helm's Deep wall. It is a microfigure version of Gimli who ties into the LEGO board games they were putting out around that time, and I actually really like the coloration of the character here. Dark orange was a pretty good pick for the character, especially because it's the color of his beard, so I think that works out quite well, and altogether, I feel like the minifigure is just very well produced. You've got the brown beard printed on him, the golden helmet, and this microfigure probably could have benefited from the actual molded helmet pieces they were introducing for the smaller board game microfigures for the Heroica line back in the day, but I think it works well enough as a board game chip, and again, they were trying to color these in very bright and interesting colors to have them be good as game pieces, and this one actually does look pretty good, even separate from the game. Versus Aragorn, which I think in green was very odd, this one in dark orange actually works pretty well in my opinion. Now we have another Gimli minifigure here, and you might be wondering, how is this any different than the other one? Well, this one came in the LEGO Dimensions lineup, and because that released in 2015, that was when LEGO was doing more standardizing across all of their product lines for LEGO minifigures. So instead of having more stylized faces, which we saw most notably in Star Wars with the Clone Wars in 2014 having sets that had super stylized faces, by 2015, whether or not it was an animated series or part of a specific IP, all of the minifigure faces got a little bit more standardized so you can use them interchangeably in the LEGO system, which I really appreciate, but that also meant that Gimli needed to get a new face that is a little bit closer to your standard LEGO graphic design. I still think that the printing on this one is a little bit too far out there for what we're used to seeing for standard LEGO minifigure design, but then of course you can see the alternate face, which definitely feels a lot closer to what we normally would see and expect from a LEGO minifigure. So instead of the original one where he had kind of the droopy eyes and you can see a bit more detail around the eyeballs, this one is a lot more standardized, and it's so interesting seeing how LEGO decided to just ever so slightly update him just for the LEGO Dimensions game, because they wanted to make him a little bit more in line with the rest of LEGO's minifigure design. They did it for Legolas when they got him in the game, as well as Gandalf, so it makes sense that Gimli got a new face as well. Here is our latest minifigure version of Gimli though, and you'll notice a few major differences. For one, they actually used mid-legs for him instead of short legs, and I guess that is the distinction LEGO wants to make between the dwarves and the hobbits. Hobbits have short legs and dwarves have mid-legs, which makes sense because Gimli is a little bit taller than Frodo and the like, so the mid-legs do check out to me, and I really hope that they use this opportunity to make more dwarves in the future that actually might have some printed detail on the mid-legs, which this one does not have, but they easily could have done that because they have printed on it before. Now, he does feature 2 brand new axes that they introduce as part of the weapons pack for Rivendell, so that is super cool. A new style of beard, and this one does showcase a little bit more of the torso design, which I appreciate, and a brand new mold for the helmet, which unfortunately is a bit of a downgrade compared to the original in some ways. Because LEGO changed the way they produce their printed pieces, instead of having the molded detail on the back of the helmet that's a lot more accurate to the movie, they had to instead space these out and make sure that they are printed on smooth surfaces, and the same goes for some of the detail on shaping on the side of the helmet. So previously, if you look at the older helmet, you had actual angled detail on the top of the helmet and it was printed on the angles, but now they're specifically printed on flat surfaces to prevent the paint from scuffing off at corners, which LEGO has changed because they want to make their minifigures feel a bit more high quality, even after years and years worth of play. It's just a different strategy and a different style that they are choosing to undertake with these, but it is interesting how that's changed over the years. One thing I do like, though, is that this version does include metallic silver arms, which is a really nice touch. I feel like that is quite a nice upgrade over the original, and he has a brown torso instead of the dark red that we're used to for Gimli. You can see the printing on the back of the torso as well as the front here, and once again, he does feature a new facial expression and unfortunately no back print for the face, and that was something I did like about the original, how expressive it was with more of a happy or neutral expression and then a very angry one with the furrowed brows, but this one they decided to do as just one standard face. He did get a new face print just for this set, and we will see if he is going to get even a different one if we were to get a new version of Gimli, maybe in the upcoming Oliphant set. It makes sense to continue alongside all of Gimli's relatives, so here we have his father Gloin in his young form as he appeared in The Hobbit, and we'll take a look at the rest of the Hobbit company very shortly, but Gloin here is really nicely produced because they actually made a brand new head mold specifically just for this character, which is really interesting to see them dedicate that amount of budget and development effort to a character that basically is just kind of a very small role in the movie, but they wanted to make every dwarf and they had to make them look the way they do in the movie. I don't know how LEGO would tackle this today. I'm guessing they would try to give him a more generic hairpiece and a beard that goes over it, but it is so specific to the character that I feel like there isn't really a way around it. Now, removing the beard there, you can see the head print that he has underneath there, and that is very similar to the Gimli one, which is quite nice because obviously they are related. And then you can see what the torso looks like underneath. He's got some details on the back and front of the torso, but altogether, it is just that beard that really, really sells it. And I'm very, very pleased that's how they were able to pull off this character, which feels so specialized despite being such a minor bit character in the movie. The reason why we started with Gloin here, though, is because we do get an older version of him, who appears in the Rivendell set. And I'm gonna be honest, this is probably the most disappointing minifigure that we have seen out of the entire dwarf lineup. Clearly, this was something they probably threw in extra because they realized they had a little bit more budget for minifigures, but didn't quite have the budget to make a new torso print or anything like that. So instead, the torso print he uses is just a generic print that is Owen from Jurassic World, and I feel like it just does not fit the character design at all for Lord of the Rings. I guess you don't really see it that much because the wrinkles are obscured here, but you can clearly see like buttons on the shirt if you remove the beard, and it just doesn't feel right. I don't know, like this is obviously meant to be a shirt that was not designed for this character. That being said, I do like the rest of the minifigure enough. Obviously what they did is they recolored the Gimli beard in white, and then they use a generic white hairpiece to showcase his long hair, as well as an old man face there. So again, I guess this does answer how LEGO would produce a minifigure like that nowadays. They would literally just use pieces that approximate the shape of what a character looks like instead of doing a unique mold, because LEGO is all about saving budget on minifigures nowadays. But then again, this does feel like very not interesting. It's super uninteresting as a minifigure, and especially the color scheme just being like light gray shirt and dark gray pants. It's just nothing crazy going on here, so we can move on. Fully moving into The Hobbit, though, we have to start off with Thorin Oakenshield, the king under the mountain, or at least he was supposed to be the king under the mountain before he was cast out and had to reclaim his homeland. This is one of 3 different Thorin Oakenshield variants, and it's his most casual, featuring the standard outfit that he wore when first visiting Bilbo's house. He does have his nice dark gray short sword, which is nice to see, and the hairpiece they actually did introduce new for the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings theme, and it specifically is designed to be allowed to be compatible with a quiver on the back, which is why there's kind of an awkward gap on the back of the hairpiece there that doesn't really work that well for a character like this who doesn't have a quiver, but it works really well if you do want to have something on the back. There's a more neutral expression on the back there, which I think makes a lot more sense for the character, but you can see what that looks like on some of the other minifigures. And then, of course, you have the very angry design of the character here, yelling, which does feel a little bit extreme, but I guess that kind of makes sense given his character arc in the movies. Nothing super crazy here. I think the other 2 are way more interesting, so let's go on to that. Here is Thorin Oakenshield in his battle armor, and this definitely is a big improvement over the other one. You have some silver metallic detail, really great fur detailing on the side of the minifigure as well, and then even continuing onto the back, you can see some great minifigure design with the belt being engraved with these really nice emblems. So altogether, I definitely think they did a very good job at making this particular minifigure. The hairpiece is good and it does match his on-screen appearance, and I only wish we got more use out of that hairpiece before it was discontinued. They used it in Ninjago a little bit for some elemental masters and in colors that do not exist, so I definitely wish that they would eventually have gotten more use out of it, but this is a hairpiece long gone because LEGO doesn't really do stuff like that anymore that makes specialized hairpieces that fit over other armor elements. By far the best Thorin minifigure, though, is this version from the Battle of the 5 Armies, and this is replicating his look as the king under the mountain, wearing his golden crown. And it's really interesting because this is before LEGO figured out how to dual mold components. So this is all printed. All of the gold detail on the crown there is just fully printed on the actual character, which is really interesting. Unfortunately, that does mean with a lot of playwear, this will scuff off, and if LEGO were to make this minifigure nowadays, they absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, would dual mold the element, and that is one downside to the way that they would produce these minifigures back then, but it is still really nicely done. They also gave us a modified version of the hairpiece because it does not accommodate the quiver here because it is just made for Thorin, and he has some upgraded golden armor. So you've got the pearl gold arms, the gold torso, and the golden short sword there, and then going on to the back of the figure, you can see some of that same pattern continue on the back. This one easily is the coolest one to me. I think it is so interesting how they were able to mold the crown into the hairpiece itself. It looks really good, and definitely is very much befitting that of a king of the dwarves. Thorin's other distant relative, this is his cousin Dane Ironfoot, is easily my favorite of all of the dwarf minifigures. This features probably one of the most intricate LEGO helmet designs ever made, and again, this is before dual molding, so all of that detail on there, the metallic gold and the dark red, is printed on, which is insane for them to do. I really, really wish LEGO would remake this minifigure nowadays, give us a dual molded helmet with even more detail, but given that his reception in the Hobbit movies was not great because for whatever reason they decided to make him a full CGI character, why did you do that, Peter Jackson? You don't need to CGI a dwarf, just put a guy in makeup, but regardless of that, this is still a really well done minifigure, and I love the amount of detail he has from the transparent red axe, and that helmet just carries the minifigure absolutely, but even removing all the other details, you can see the details that he has underneath. He is just utilizing the same headpiece as seen in Glowing and some of the other dwarves, but I think that works okay for the character. And then, of course, the armor underneath is really nicely done. I love the detail of the silver armor. It looks so good for Dane here, and altogether, for one of the final LEGO Lord of the Rings and Hobbit minifigures we ever got from that original lineup, this was absolutely a great way to go out because this minifigure is insanely detailed. They would never make a minifigure like this nowadays, and unfortunately, because they really tried to push the boundaries of making this minifigure, you can see that the gold print doesn't quite line up with the helmet. Like if you look right here, it's kind of spilled a little bit over onto the silver, and that is why LEGO doesn't do stuff like this anymore, because they cannot fully control the way that the gold paint is going to react, so they never would make a minifigure like this nowadays. It would have to be dual molded, but it's really cool to see in a period in LEGO's history when they were really experimenting with what they could do with minifigures. Moving on in general order of importance, we have Keely the Dwarf, and this is one of the ones from the Hobbit company to get two different variations of him throughout the different films. This is the first variation of Keeley that we got, and you can see them using that hairpiece with the quiver on the back, so that is quite nice to see the hair just draping directly over that. Clearly it was designed to interface with that classic LEGO component, and while you may critique the design of the dwarves in the movie, like this was just a handsome man, this was not a dwarf, you can see that it's replicated really nicely in terms of the minifigure design, and clearly the LEGO designers did their best to really bring in that dwarven energy into a character that was basically just a dude who was CGI'd to look smaller. Now, you do have an alternate expression on the back with a very angry expression, which I think makes sense for the character, but also again, is a really good example of the LEGO design graphics going a little bit too extreme for the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings minifigures. They feel a bit too stylized with how extreme that yell is. So definitely not the biggest fan of how they pulled that one off. I much prefer the more neutral expression because it makes it feel like it fits a lot better in the Lord of the Rings and just the regular LEGO sort of design aesthetics. Still, it's a well-produced minifigure. Dark brown is a nice color scheme to get with the dark green as well, and it definitely matches up really nicely with the movie counterpart. So now let's take a look at his other outfits. Here is Keeley in some of the final battle outfits that we saw for the Battle of the Five Armies, where of course he eventually met his demise. And this is featuring gunmetal gray armor, and it's really cool to see the dwarves in battle armor. I would have loved to see them make some sort of a new component for the hair with the helmet he was wearing or some other armor, because we saw all the dwarves march out of the Lonely Mountain fully equipped in armor, and it would have been really cool to have them make new elements and components for that. But I think it makes sense they wanted to just focus on the crown for Thorin and then reuse some of the dwarf elements for these other ones, which is why this one just has that standard hairpiece and nothing else. Still, I think the design is quite nice. You can see what it looks like with the printing on the back. That metallic gold and silver looks really good on the minifigure, and I'm definitely a fan of how they pulled this one off. We have his brother Fili next, and this one is pretty much a very identical design to the other Keeley minifigure, except this one just has hair in a different color, and it makes sense, you know, Fili, Keeley are brothers, and they're also related to Thorin, so we are going in order of not just importance, but also Thorin's relatives and relations now, so they are all his cousins, I believe. All the dwarves are kind of just all related, apparently, but this is a nicely done minifigure. Didn't really have that much to do in the movie, but I feel like they pulled off the design of the actor very well here. It really does look like the face that he has in the movie, and then of course you have an angry expression there that actually matches his brother, which is quite funny how they seemingly designed these together because they both have the exact same angry and neutral expressions, which is quite funny. This one is a little bit happier in terms of like he's smiling here, the other one is a lot more neutral, but of course he is using the same hairpiece, which does fit around the quiver. We've got our final battle version of Fili right here, and this one is in dark blue armor. I love how they were able to change up the color schemes of the dwarves a lot, especially as we got into the Battle of the Five Armies, and they started to don battle armor and not just the standard robes, so it is a big difference from one outfit to the next, and clearly that's why LEGO wanted to make them feel distinct, because these are battle outfits as opposed to the more casual clothing that the rest of the dwarves had earlier, and I think in the perfect world, we would have gotten more copies of every single one of the dwarves with the battle armor as well, but that also would have been a lot to ask for because that's so many minifigures, so I get why they focused on just the most important ones. Now this one is really nicely designed. You can see really intricate kind of like chainmail and metallic gold and silver details on the back there, so that is quite nice to see, and of course he is wielding the two different swords that we often see him wielding in the movie. The LEGO Hobbit board game also brought us some microfigures of the dwarves, although strangely enough, they did not cover some of the more important dwarves like Thorin, but we did at least get Fili and Keeley, who were probably like the second or third most important dwarves in the Hobbit movies. Fili and Keeley obviously go together as a pair, so it makes sense we would get both of them, and I think they're depicted quite nicely here. The choice of dark blue and tan is a little bit strange, but I can sort of see what they were going for. Obviously, they wanted the board game figures to stand out a little bit on the playing field, and that's why they went for that. It's also probably a little bit easier to depict them because they don't have the gigantic beards or crazy hats like some of the other characters do, so they wanted something simpler to make, and these are just nice little additions to the collection. The Hobbit board game was a big letdown compared to the Lord of the Rings board game, which was a lot more fun, like a strategy game, and the Hobbit one was basically just matching and memory planning, so honestly, it wasn't that exciting to get them for the game, but it is nice to get microfigures of some of the dwarves. Next up, we have the advisor to Thorin. This is Balin the Dwarf. We got two different versions of Balin given his prominence in the movies, and this is the first one, featuring slightly more casual clothes and a dark red cloak, which is really cool to see in that color for a half cape. This one also appeared in the very first LEGO Hobbit sets, so it makes sense why they wanted to focus on the early designs here for this minifigure, and again, he does have an exclusive beard element that they only used ever for this character. And it's so cool how they put so much effort into designing that. Of course, removing the beard element there, you can see what the face looks like underneath. He does have an alternate face that looks a lot more grumpy or maybe annoyed at Thorin's antics. And then of course on the back there, you can see some of the detailing on the back of the torso with black, silver, and the really nice embroidery design there. I feel like that is a really nice touch and definitely makes this minifigure stand out above the rest. Not my favorite dwarf in terms of the graphic design for the character. I feel like the face maybe doesn't quite match up with the actors as well as it could. I definitely feel like some of the other dwarves capture the likenesses a lot better, but I think they did a pretty decent job here, and getting that mold is really nice. We got our final battle armor version of Balin in the Desolation of Smaug and Battle of the Five Armies sets, and this one comes armed with a club in dark red, which is really cool. I feel like it complements the outfit really well, and that's something that they did for all the dwarves in battle armor. They had specialized weapons that complemented the color of their outfits, and he is retaining his dark red color scheme, but this time he has ditched the cloak and instead is just using primarily battle armor, and of course he's got the key to Erebor right there as well. Removing the accessory and the beard here so you can see what he looks like underneath, they actually have a really nice metallic copper design on the torso that pretty much is fully obscured by the beard. It's almost a shame because this is a really cool minifig torso, and of course you have that same color continue on the back, which thankfully you can see with the beard on. So altogether, this is definitely a major upgrade in terms of the minifigure to me. I just find him a lot more exciting because he's got the battle armor on and he just feels a lot more imposing than the regular civilian clothes version, but it was nice to get the dark red cape on the other one, so you kind of have to pick your poison here. I feel like we're going in order of screen time here because next up we have Dwalin, who was reasonably important, but I can't remember a single thing he did. Gun to my head, I could not tell you anything he did in the movies, but he was important enough to get featured a lot more in the marketing, and he also did have two different LEGO minifigures, so we're going to go in order of that as well. Dwalin has, again, another specialized beard piece they introduced for the character, which is done really nicely. I love the amount of detail there, and they also reused it later on in a different color scheme for some of the other dwarves as well. This version of the character has the large battle axe, but also, very notably, he does have this really nice olive green colored cape, which is a single attachment here. It doesn't have the two different holes because the beard just goes directly over it, which was pretty rare for its time. And then underneath, you can see what the minifigure looks like fully beardless. It's very uncanny to see that, so let's see who is going to take this one home. And then, of course, you've got the fur on the back and some bootstraps there as well. So great minifigure design, and definitely a big fan of how they put this one together. Instead of Thorin, one of the only dwarves we got in the Hobbit board game was Dwalin, which is cool to get, but it's a weird character to focus on, especially because he didn't honestly have that much to do in the movies. I guess LEGO figured or maybe imagined that he would be a more important character, given the actor and also his look and feel, so they decided to depict him, but it is very odd to get Fili, Kili, and Dwalin as our main microfigure dwarves, and not Thorin, who is basically the main character dwarf from the Hobbit movies. Not necessarily something I'm majorly complaining about. I think the microfigure is good, and it's really nice how they're able to capture a lot of that fine detail in his face, but it's still a little bit odd how this is the one they decided to give us. Our upgraded version of Dwalin in battle armor, though, is a lot more interesting than the previous designs. This one has the transparent green axe, which is really cool they did that, and of course, the green armor with gunmetal gray arms. I feel like that is just such a cool design for the character. No cape on this one, but it makes sense because he is going into battle with his armor, and it definitely is a really interesting design how they wanted to focus on highlighting the color schemes of the dwarves. So while he had olive green on the previous minifigure, this one is more featuring a dark green color scheme, and they really wanted to emphasize that in the design of the character. It really feels super specialized in how they pulled this one off, and this was actually exclusive to the set that included Smaug, so it is one of the rarer LEGO Lord of the Rings or Middle-earth minifigures. design of the torso is very nice. I'm just a sucker for a dark green color scheme. I feel like that is such a cool Lego color to use, and it just looks really good on this minifigure, so definitely a big fan of this, and how the weapon totally complements the outfit as well. He has absolutely got the dwarf drip on right here. Next up, we have Bofer the Dwarf here, and this one does have such a specialized and unique hat element. Again, it is so cool to see how much effort they put into crafting these characters, and again, this was before dual molding, so while Lego would undoubtedly dual mold the element today if they were to make it, this one is just all painted over a rubberized component, which honestly makes it even more impressive. This is the only time we ever got this character in minifigure form. They did not choose to make a new version of the minifigure with his battle armor, so what you see here is what you get for the character, but they actually managed to give him an exclusive printed head as well as the actual hat piece. So here you can see what the character looks like without all of the associated paraphernalia, and this is what the hat looks like. It is primarily a rubberized gray element, but then it's painted in brown all on the top and dark brown for the hair. So it's so interesting just how much effort went into crafting a minifigure like this, who again has basically no screen time in the movie. It's so cool to see Lego just go all out when making these characters, and it really makes me wish the old glory days of licensed Lego themes where we would get stuff like this. Now, Bomber the Dwarf here may be one of the most comical Lego sculpts ever, because Bomber's entire character in the Hobbit movies was that he liked to eat, and as a result, he was very rotund. And that was all the character he had. Every single gag he had revolved around that. Every line of dialogue he had revolved around that. I don't think he said anything in the last two movies. Actually, I don't remember him saying a single line of dialogue, so that's literally all I remember about the character, but clearly, they managed to convey that very well for the minifigure, because you have this very specialized head sculpt here that actually goes above the head and over the torso to simulate the very rotund belly that he's got with the beard kind of going over it. So if you look at the side profile, obviously I've equipped him with food, but you actually can see the belly jutting out on the minifigure, which is one of the only times they've ever done that. He has a printed bald spot on the top of his head as well, which is so funny to see. And removing that, you can just see he basically has the same exact printing underneath, but again, it's this specialized mold here that they made for him that's so unique. And before dual molding, all of this is printed details. So while this would probably be dual molded today, I would also imagine Lego wouldn't make this today. I think that they would probably just have the beard on him and maybe try to print the beard. I don't know. This is just so specialized and unlike anything that Lego has really ever done before or since. And it's so cool because it makes the character feel like that much effort was put into him for such a random side character. Next up, we have our only minifigure of Beefer here, and again, despite the fact that this guy literally could not speak because he has an axe embedded in his head and he could only mutter and grunt until the final movie where the axe is removed from his head, they still went all out on making this minifigure. I mean, I'm almost incredulous at how much budget and effort was put into crafting these minifigures, despite them being very small bit roles in the movie. Now, this one is done really nicely. He's got the spear as the accessory, and if you remove that piece there, you can see they literally molded the axe and printed it into the beard. So it looks like it's embedded in his head. There's a scar there where it's supposed to sit. And then, of course, you can see what the printing on the torso looks like on the back. This is a really funny expression there. Like, this feels so wild for him, but then again, you can't even see the mouth, so it's kind of all covered up. But they did that extra effort to have him have that very unique expression. And then he has almost like a pixelated look for the top part of his cloak there, which is really interesting. Definitely feels almost like Minecraft inspired, but obviously that just matches up with his costume in the movie. I just find it interesting how Lego chose to depict that on the minifigure. And again, despite the fact that it is just kind of a random character, he's got the cape, exclusive torso, exclusive head, exclusive mold made for his hair. I mean, they don't do it like this anymore for even any movie, like the biggest movie ever. I don't think Avengers Doomsday is getting this kind of love in terms of new molds and minifigure parts. As we go through the dwarves, we have Dory here. This is our only minifigure that we got of him, but yes, he does have an exclusive hairpiece like every single one of the dwarves do. He's got a nice dark red cape as well, which I think fits the character quite nicely, and he does have a unique chain weapon as well. It's really cool just how much effort went into crafting the head sculpt there. I love the actual molded detail of all the top knots on the top of the hair and the braids going onto the back. It just feels so unique and specialized, but also something that I could actually see being used in other fantasy settings for other dwarf characters. It just works really well in that sense. And you can see what that mold looks like right there. Nothing crazy printed on the character for this one, just a really nice molded design for the hair. And then he has a slightly more neutral expression on the back there as well. Plus, pretty generic print on the back, nothing super crazy going on. Definitely the most interesting thing about this one is the hairpiece, and he's not the most interesting dwarf here, I think especially because that hairpiece, if you don't look at it that closely, kind of looks like an existing Lego hairpiece, and if they were to make him today, they probably would not make a specialized mold for this character, but they bothered to do it in 2012, which is very cool. We looked at Dory, so now it's time to look at Ori. This is one of the youngest members of the dwarf company, but he's already starting to grow his beard, and I do like how they wanted to make that a distinction about his character in the movie. Like, that was kind of his whole point, is that the bad guys kept threatening to eat the young one or to kill the young one, and he would always look scared, but he's still kind of determined and wanting to fight. And I feel like they've actually managed to pull that expression off relatively well in minifigure form. Again, this one is one of the only dwarves to not have a unique hairpiece. He is just using the Harry and Ron wig sculpt, but I actually think it works totally okay for the character because it is what his hair looked like in the movie, and then he has a very scared expression on the back there. If you want to see what the printing on the purple torso looks like, he's got a slingshot printed on the back, which is quite rare. Lego doesn't typically tend to print accessories onto minifigures nowadays, so that is nice to see. And then of course he is armed with the standard axe as well. Probably one of the least interesting dwarves to get to here, but still a nice unique design. Here is Oin the Dwarf. Again, crazy specialized hair, printed beard, and really specialized top knot of the hair going back mold created just for this character that I could not remember at all for anything he did in the movies, which is so impressive that Lego put so much effort into him. I actually really like this one. I feel like this one is one of the standout minifigures. The design is super unique compared to the rest of the dwarves, especially because of the hair pointing up at the back, and I feel like from the front, you can really use this for a number of different applications. Like the white beard printed on the gray rubberized piece is just very useful in general, and he does have the specialized expression on the front and the back there, showcasing a happy and angry side of the face. So very interesting piece of usage here. The rest of the minifigure is honestly really uninteresting. I feel like the brown torso and dark tan legs just is not the most exciting thing in the world, but put the beard on and all of a sudden, this is one of the most specialized and interesting Lego minifigures we got from the entire lineup. Love the sculpting there. Again, Lego maybe would dual mold it today, or maybe they would try to use pre-existing pieces. I don't know how they would make this today, but certainly not quite like this, which is very cool and special. And finally, we've come to Journey's End. This is Nori the dwarf here, who once again features an exclusive molded beard, but this time it's actually not a rubberized component. Whereas most of the other beard pieces introduced for this lineup of dwarves were fully rubberized, this one is actually hard plastic, which makes sense because it doesn't fully cover the torso, and it kind of is its own thing in terms of being its own standalone piece. Without that piece though, you can see what the face looks like underneath, and I'm not the biggest fan of this particular facial design print. I feel like the mouth expression there just doesn't really match up with what I would expect to see for standard Lego minifig design. But then on the back there, I think this is a little bit more in line with what I would like to see from Lego minifigure design. So again, they were kind of getting closer and closer as the years went on to getting these as good as possible for standard Lego minifigure standardization, but altogether, it's nicely done. I like the very unique detail of the 3 different braids on the beard. I think that's been pulled off very nicely, and overall, great minifig to add to the collection. Alright, and with that, we have summed up our look at all of the dwarf characters across Middle-earth, The Hobbit, and The Lord of the Rings, and it's really interesting how for the modern-day Lord of the Rings remakes, we only have a couple of dwarves. There's just the new version of Gimli, and the new version of his father, which is very odd. Like, getting Gloin and Gimli together, I guess, is cool, but I feel like we are missing so many more dwarves, and it would be really cool to get more minifigures of them. Of course, since we're focusing more on the Lord of the Rings movies and not The Hobbit, it makes sense that those are the only 2 that we get, and I'm really curious if they're going to continue to upgrade the Gimli design in the rumored Oliphant set coming out next January. Very excited for that we're getting a January Lord of the Rings release, so we're gonna have to wait and see what minifigures are in that set, but altogether, this was a ton of fun to go into. I had a blast putting these minifigures together, seeing all the differences between them, and all the intricate details on especially those Hobbit minifigures. I mean, say what you will about the movies, but those minifigures are some of the best figures we have gotten from any Lego theme, honestly, to this day. And I don't think that Lego would ever do that again to the level of detail that they did. I honestly don't know how Lego would approach a problem like that today to make all of the individual unique dwarves dwarves. It's such a budget strain on the company, but I'm really happy they did devote all the resources needed to make every character back in 2013. That was so cool to see, and I hope you enjoyed our look at all of the dwarves from The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings, mostly Hobbit dominated this time, which is interesting because most of the times all of these species looks usually focus mostly on Lord of the Rings, but given that there were so many characters in The Hobbit for dwarves, it makes sense that we have this entire lineup. And finally, we've made our way to the marshlands of New Zealand, where of course I figured this may be a place where we might find some slightly unsavory characters. Orcs, goblins, trolls, and even Gollum could be found skulking around the waters here, so right as it starts raining, let's jump in to some of the villainous characters of Middle-earth. This is one of the most diverse and largest lineups yet, although I will say many of them are just variations of the same minifigure. There are some really incredible villain minifigures throughout the entire LEGO Lord of the Rings lineup here, all sorts of orcs, and of course all of the evilness in the form of Sauron and all of his allies. There's so much to get into here, and you know where we're going to start. We have to start off with the Dark Lord, the embodiment of all evil in Middle-earth, Sauron. Now, we have gotten Sauron across two different sets. He first came out in the 2024 Barad-dûr, and then he actually came out in the recent Sauron bust, which is very, very exciting because I'm really happy that a minifigure as detailed and cool as this was actually released in a slightly smaller set. Now, he wields his mace and the One Ring, but I really want to emphasize that it is so interesting how they depicted this minifigure. Unlike how they probably would have done it in the past, where they, I assume, would have made the helmet and the armor a specialized set of two different pieces in order to save on mold budget, but also to depict him in the way they wanted to, they chose to have the armor and helmet all act as one rubberized element, which I think works in a lot of ways, but also is a little disappointing in some ways because I would have loved to see a little bit of articulation coming from the head there. Underneath, with the helmet and armor piece removed here, which is fully rubberized, you can see the flaming head behind there, which is quite nice to see, and then lifting up the cape, which is a special cut of cloth. It's a similar cut that Gandalf has for his cape. You can see what the minifigure looks like behind there with gunmetal gray detailing all around. I think that this is a phenomenal minifigure, but I definitely do wish there was some way to separate off the helmet from the armor because I feel like that would have just elevated the minifigure so much more. Still, it's an amazing figure, and definitely one of my favorite out of the entire Lord of the Rings lineup. The only ways that I can think of making it even better were if they were to have used the longer woody legs. I feel like since those are still in production now, it would have been the perfect time to actually give us a taller Sauron, given that he towers over everybody else in Middle-earth. So I think that would have been more interesting, but maybe it would have looked a bit uncanny to have the really, really long legs. I guess we'll never know, but aside from that, this minifigure is very nicely done, and definitely one of the crowning jewels of the villainous collection here. Technically, we did get a Sauron minifigure, though, before our official Sauron minifigure, and this is the Necromancer of Dol Guldur, who, of course, at the time of the Hobbit movies coming out was a mystery, but when you actually watch the movies, they eventually reveal this to be Sauron in disguise. So technically, this is our first Sauron minifigure, but it doesn't really represent what he is supposed to look like. In fact, it's based directly off of concept art, and the Necromancer doesn't even really look like this in the movie, so this very much is clearly just an after effect of them trying to market a mystery villain that they weren't ready to reveal yet in the marketing. I do think it has a very cool design though, because it's almost very minimalistic in its minifigure design. You just have a little bit of a shaping of a chest and an angry ghost face on the front there. Literally no printing on the back. It is plain black on the back there, and it feels very ghostly and specter-like. You can imagine that this is something that you would see in the shadows, just the outline of the face and the design of the chest. So I think it is really interesting and cool as a minifigure, but definitely not the most exciting thing, and for a while it looked like this might be our only Sauron minifigure ever, which would have been really disappointing. There was also a statue of the Necromancer at Dol Guldur as well, which technically is its own official minifigure. This one is printed for the standard slope element and the torso, which is really interesting. It got two unique sets of prints, so it is a fully unique minifigure in its own right. It's definitely something that feels very specialized, but also something you could use in other statues or Lego castle themes, so I do like the fact that the parts are useful for other things, although of course this one does directly match up with some of the statues that Gandalf encountered in Dol Guldur. So very cool to see that, but also not the most exciting minifigure, so we can move on. Sauron, however, needs someone to speak on his behalf when dealing with mortals, and so we have our first Mouth of Sauron minifigure here. This is the one from 2013 that appeared in the Battle at the Black Gate, and it's really interesting how they've actually made a couple of different versions of this minifigure, just depending on what era you are actually from. Now, this is the OG version, and he is using a fully rubberized sculpt where you can actually see the black printed onto the back of the paste there, which is really interesting to see, and obviously it goes right around the mouth, which is a really nice touch and definitely makes this minifigure feel very uncanny and unique. While filming The Lord of the Rings, they actually initially considered making the mouth vertical, which I think would have made him look even freakier, but they just went for this style of design, which I think works very well for the minifigure too. It definitely fits with the helmet very well, and he has a very simple back with the standard cloth cape for the fabric there. Relatively simple for the minifigure print design, but it's that helmet that really makes this character stand out so much amongst the others in the crowd. We got an updated version of the Mouth of Sauron in 2024 for the Barad-dûr set, and this is very similar to the old one, but he actually does have a unique head sculpt. That is not the standard head sculpt that we got for the 2013 one, instead it is updated for 2024, and that way the printing for the black on the back is a lot more crisp and clear. It really goes to show how LEGO has improved their printing processes over the years, and he even has a lot more prominent spikes for the front and the back. They were kind of rounded off and a lot wider on the original minifigure, and they were able to make them a little bit pointier and thinner for this one right here. Now, removing the helmet, you can see what the print looks like underneath, a little bit more detail factored into the head, which is always nice to see, and then showcasing the cape from the back, he just has a pretty simple kind of black back of the robes there, which makes a lot of sense. Not much going on the back, but overall, this is a very menacing minifigure, and I just think it is all-time one of the coolest Lord of the Rings minifigure designs. We are starting off very strong with the two main villain characters here. We then have to cover the Witch King of Angmar, and this is our only Witch King minifigure, and obviously it does not look at all like the Witch King from the Lord of the Rings movies, and that's because this was based off of his appearance in the Hobbit movies, where he was mostly just a specter or ghost without any sort of corporeal body or form. I think it's a really well done minifigure, and especially if you look at the designs of the Nazgul in those movies, where they were specters and floated around and they all looked a little bit different, I feel like this is a really nice design to use for them. I love the piece they introduced, this rubberized crown element that just fits the character so well. It's so useful, and they also reuse this in different colors for detail and other design elements for other LEGO castles like the Disney castle, and it is a really underrated LEGO piece. I really wish that element stuck around. The head is fully glow-in-the-dark, which is very cool, and of course you can see the printing of the body on the back. It is just a white body, but nowadays LEGO has actually figured out how to fully make glow-in-the-dark minifigures from head to toe, so I'm sure if they made this minifigure again today, it would be molded in that particular plastic. But as of right now, it is still very cool. I love the cut of cloth for the cape there. It is one of the coolest cape elements that LEGO has ever produced, and I really wish they would still use it for the more modern Nazgul that we got, but it's still a very cool minifigure. Love the designs here, and say what you will about The Hobbit integrating them into the movies where they probably didn't need to be in there, it is still a sick design. And now we wait for an actual Witch King minifigure. Speaking of the Nazgul, we have to take a look at our very first Nazgul from the Lord of the Rings lineup in 2012, and that is this one right here. Plain black head, very simple cloth printing for the cape, but this just feels super deluxe thanks to the actual cloth fabric cape they used. It's the same cut of cape we just saw on the Witch King, and I think this, again, is one of the coolest LEGO cape elements ever. And a lot of that boils down to the fact that this actually attached via multiple different neck holes. So if you actually go ahead and remove this, you'll be able to see that the cape attached via 3 different attachment points on the neck of the minifigure to really make it look like it's draped around the character. And that's something that they very rarely do for a minifigure cape, and I really wish they brought back for the modern day Nazgul, which honestly is a little bit of a downgrade in almost every way. Very simple printing on the back of the character there, but it is the cape that absolutely carries this one. Here's the modern day budget Nazgul, and yeah, it's alright. They're just using a pre-existing cloth of tattered cape, which I think works okay for the character, but compared to what we got back in the day, it is a night and day difference. That older cape was so much better. The torso design is a little bit more detailed, which I do appreciate. They did try to bring it more into modern sensibilities. Plain black legs, plain black head, and I actually do like the usage of the specialized Star Wars hood element here. I feel like it fits the characters a lot better than the classic LEGO hood. This just looks a lot closer to how they appeared in the movies, so that is a big upgrade, the usage of that cloak, but everything else about it is kind of a downgrade, mostly because the cape it's just not as cool, you know? This is a fabric clud of cape that we've had for so long, and I feel like they could have just easily brought back that older cape, but chose not to because this only appeared in one single GWP. Moving on to the orcs, here we have Gothmog, who is one of the general or leader orcs. He's exclusive to the Barad-dûr set with an exclusive printed armor element and a new mold they introduced for the Uruk-hai style of shield, which is really interesting that they chose not to just bring back that older piece. He does come with a ton of different helmets, and I chose this one to put on him should you wish, but technically the minifigure is supposed to just not have a helmet. That's how he appears in the movies, but I actually think he looks a little cooler with this asymmetrical, misshapen helmet here. I think that just completes the look of the figure very well, but again, you can use your own imagination here. One thing I want to talk about when it comes to the new shields, I'm honestly not a big fan of the way that LEGO has decided these shields need to be mounted on minifigure hands. If you can see here, the clip is vertical, which I guess makes more sense in real life and allows them to carry the shields like this, but one of my favorite things to do was to allow the minifigures to hold the shields very close to their body, but now he's holding it too diagonally. It really should be held in the more vertical, upright position, but now it looks like he's sticking the shield way too far forward. So I feel like the old style of attachment point where you could actually have it rotate like this on the hand was a lot better than the way you have it now, where it's pretty much fixed, and I even had to rotate his hand upside down to even make it look somewhat close to he's holding the shield close to his body. So maybe that's just the classic LEGO Castle fan in me wanting to go back to the OG style, but it's definitely something that I feel like is a bit of a downside, especially when you look at all the modern shield molds. I feel like almost all of the modern LEGO shields have done the vertical clip piece, and I don't really know why they did that. With the armor removed though, you can see the level of detail on the torso and legs is pretty unparalleled. It is really cool to see how LEGO minifigures have evolved over time and gotten even better, and this is a great example of how so many years have passed since the original Uruk-hai and the original orcs, and this is the level of quality we can expect now, where not only does he have that gunmetal gray breastplate, but it's actually printed, which adds so much more to the minifigure, and is why I feel like some of the other Uruk-hai from 2012 that we'll look at later on in this video feel almost a little bit too plain. But let's move on right now. Another important named orc is Lurtz here. Lurtz was one of the fighting Uruk-hai, and he was basically used to inspect the Uruk-hai as they were loaded off the production line and sent into Saruman's army. Of course, because of that, he has some metal material there in his hand, which he uses to actually craft and create more Uruk-hai, and he's a very iconic character, very recognizable villainous minifigure from the movies, so I really like that they did manage to recreate him in LEGO form. Unfortunately, the minifigure is nothing really special. No printing on the legs. I'm sure if they made him today, they probably would print a loincloth or something like that. And then he just has the bare chest. On the back, that's what he looks like. One side of the face does not have the white hand of Saruman, and the other side does, showcasing his allegiance like it's been pressed onto him. It is interesting how they went for the regular hand print and not like a minifigure hand, but I think using the C-shaped minifigure hand would have just not looked right on the minifigures, so I actually do like how they did manage to print it there, even though it does take you out of the LEGO universe a little bit to see all 5 fingers on that. We have a standard orc here, also for the board game as a microfigure game piece, and this one's done up in black with gunmetal gray printing on the torso, and a standard Uruk-hai orc headpiece printed on the head there. I feel like this one does match up pretty nicely to the actual orcs that we get in the sets, and doing it in black made a lot of sense. This is a board game that had a ton of different figures in lime green, dark red, regular green, blue, sand green, gold, red, silver, and gunmetal gray, so black for the villain faction, especially for the massable characters, makes a lot of sense to me. Now this one here doesn't have a name, but it is one of the other notable Urukai, and this is the Berserker. It's a great minifigure. He has the bomb and the torch that he uses to blow up the wall of Helm's Deep, and I feel like that was such an iconic scene, a very iconic character and minifigure to get. This is a very simple minifigure. You can see the white hands of Saruman printed on the torso like so, which matches up with the character design, the white mask as well, or the white face, plus the helmet he's wearing. I feel like there is pretty much no better way to improve this minifigure other than giving him some sort of printing on the legs, but it was really cool to get that very specific orc that everyone remembers from the movies. We also got a ton of microfigure orcs for the Battle for Helm's Deep, and this first one here is the Berserker. This is meant to depict the shirtless one that I guess blows himself up, or some of the other orcs around the similar design, and I think bright red was actually a good choice to use for the character. Obviously, they wanted to make it stand out on the board game, which is why he is in such a bright color scheme, but I actually really like the design of the character. The white hand over the face is very cool. You've got the Saruman hands on the chest as well, which is a really cool design. The loincloth and the face, it just looks suitably creepy and something that is having this Berserker ability. If you actually play the board game, he had a special ability which they wanted to call out. LEGO released a Lord of the Rings board game in 2012 featuring a ton of characters focused around the Battle for Helm's Deep, and this is one of the microfigures. They all had to be colored in relatively gaudy colors so you could use them as movement tokens for the game and so kids could easily spot them, but we'll start off with the Berserker here because we just took a look at the minifigure form. But now it's time to turn our attention to the Urukai. This is one of the most specialized minifigures that we got from the 2012 Lord of the Rings line, and they haven't made a newer version of it. I would love to see LEGO try to tackle an Urukai in the modern day, but I'm guessing they're probably saving it for when they eventually remake Helm's Deep, probably in like 2028 or 29. Who really knows what LEGO's plans are for Lord of the Rings? You can see though he has that older style of shield that I prefer a lot compared to the original one, especially because you can just hold it a lot closer to the chest there, which just feels a lot better than the standard one. You've got the white handprint of Saruman there on the shield and the helmet, and I won't spend too much time taking off the armor elements because we're about to see a lot more Urukai with varying degrees of armor on them. Finally, we have a silver Urukai commander, and this is utilizing the metallic silver color scheme for the character. Very rare that we got a board game microfigure using this color scheme, and I think it looks really cool. It's very interesting how they're able to depict them in all these different colors for the villain faction here, and this one just stands out because you do have the hand of Saruman printed across the helmet there, which I'm really impressed they were able to actually print despite the fact that this is so small on the breastplate right there. Not quite on the helmet, but on the breastplate there, which is quite nice to see. And then of course the facial design is done up really well, and you can clearly see where the shaping of the helmet is supposed to look with just the printing on the face, which I think is very well done. For instance, here's one without the white handprints, which does count as an exclusive, unique variant. This one is meant to be before Saruman has marked them as his own, and not every single one was marked with the white hand, so it's kind of just meant to be an army builder here. Honestly, I feel like in retrospect, the armor does make it feel a little plain. Having the breastplate completely cover up the torso printing definitely does make it feel like it is almost too simplified as a minifigure, and that's one thing I really appreciate the new orcs actually do for Lord of the Rings. They managed to print on the breastplates a more detailed design, and I'm really glad they did that because this ends up feeling a little too plain in my opinion. Our standard fighting Urukai microfigures were done up in gunmetal gray, and this is pretty much the perfect color scheme for them because that's the color of the helmets and armor that they wear. I actually really like the design of this one. I feel like this is probably one of my favorites out of all the microfigures. It's not using a color scheme that's either too gaudy or doesn't fit the character well, and it also is something that you can amass for armies, especially if you want to recreate micro-scale Lord of the Rings scenes. So it has a lot of usefulness outside of just the board game, versus green Aragorn, which I feel like you can only really use in the context of the game. Now we've got one here without the breastplate, so you can actually see what the torso printing looks like underneath, and I actually do really like the detail here. The dark brown used for the outfit and the dark red for the skin tone actually works very well for the Urukai. I think it matches their designs in the movie really nicely, and while all of them did just use the same head, torso, and legs, I mean, it worked very well for an army builder, so it didn't really make sense to have that much variety, especially in the 2012 wave, which really focused on specifically the Urukai. We've got her last Urukai variation here, and this one is completely without any armor, no helmet, no breastplate, just the head and hair, and you can see what he looks like pretty unobstructed here. I'll remove the hairpiece so you can see the back of the printing on the head as well, which is a nice print. Again, I do like how you have the option to have the hand on or the hand off to have army builders, so you can kind of diversify your army if you happen to have multiple copies of all these minifigures, and throughout the sets you got various different armored up versions of them. So this one has no armor, the other one had no breastplate, one of them doesn't have the helmet print or anything like that, and I just like how you kind of make it feel like you're upgrading your armies as you go along here. One unique one that we get is the Moria Orc, and this one is distinguished from the rest because it's got the olive green skin tone, and it's meant to depict the orcs and trolls and goblins that attacked them in the scene in the Mines of Moria. This one does have an exclusive torso print as well as no printing on the legs, but that was kind of par for the course in 2012. Two different facial expressions, so one kind of showcasing a very excited, angry with glowing eyes, and then one that's a little bit more subdued. I actually kind of prefer the one with the crazy eyes here, so I'm going to display them like that. And for the orcs, you can also notice they introduced a brand new hairpiece, showcasing the ears printed alongside the hair, because this was before LEGO created dual molding. That is one thing you will notice from the difference of the older minifigures to the modern ones. LEGO discovered how to dual mold components between the original Lord of the Rings lineup and today, so that's why if this were to be made today, they absolutely would just use a hairpiece that has the ears molded instead of painted, so you don't have any scuff marks over the years, which is an improvement from what we got before. Now we do have some modern olive green orcs, and while this one did come in the Barad-dûr set, it kind of matches the similar style of the Moria orcs, so I'm choosing to display them next to each other. It's really interesting because they utilize the only hairpiece with pointy ears that was still in production, which is the Harry Potter goblin hairpiece, which I think kind of works for some of these characters, but unfortunately the hair looks almost a little bit too combed and nicely slicked back. I kind of preferred the greasier and longer hair of the original ones, but because they didn't want to make a new mold for it, this is pretty much just all they had. It is nice though seeing the ears actually be dual molded into the side of the face, just giving them an extra level of quality beyond the originals, and the one thing I love about the graphic design of the new orcs is just how detailed it is. The gunmetal grade breastplate, the detailing on the back of the armor, everything about it is just very nicely done, and you do have two different alternate expressions here. One that's almost like kind of a sheepish, like sort of smirk or kind of a scowl there. I don't really know what they were getting at with that expression. I much prefer this one, which showcases him angry and attacking, although they are both kind of subdued for orcs. I understand that LEGO went through a few graphic design changes since Lord of the Rings came out, and they wanted to tone down the crazy expressions of the characters, but I feel like they could have pushed it up a little bit more for something like an orc that is meant to be crazy, vicious, and wild.
Barad-dûr also gave us another variation of this orc, this time with a slightly different torso print, and I really appreciate how they decided to do that because in the movies, the orcs were incredibly varied. No two orcs looked the same, so it was really important for them to include variation when it came to the orc ranks. And you can also get a better look at the newer style of shield on this minifigure as well. And beyond that, 2026's Grand GWP with Minas Tirith gave us an exclusive headprint for the previous orc.
This is very similar to the one we just looked at, but he does have a new face print that is exclusive to Grand and probably won't appear in any other sets. It's really cool to see this because you actually have a slightly different design with the kind of detailing of, I guess, a braid going down the center of the eyes there, the glowing yellow eyes, and on the back, you can see him be very angry. So this is more what I'm looking at in terms of an orc. I feel like that is definitely something that fits the design of the characters a lot better, and it's cool to get a slightly different variation, even just for a GWP. Going back to 2012, this is a standard Mordor orc with no extra armor or accessories. I'm having him use the grappling attachment that he had in the Tower of Orthanc, but they came in a ton of different sets with all sorts of different accessories here, and you can see what the torso print looks like from the back and the front, and even bothered to print the back of the head, showcasing just a little bit of hair, because if you had the bald ones like these, it still needed to make sense in universe, so they printed that little extra tuft of hair on the back, which I think is a really nice touch. You've got the glowing orange eyes here, and altogether, definitely think that this is a pretty good template for the orcs, but I feel like the Urukai are just so much more interesting here, especially because these ones unfortunately do not have printed legs. There was another official variation released in 2012 and 2013 that had a gunmetal gray breastplate on, because you wanted to depict them with varying stages of armor. And then you had one with no breastplate plus a helmet, so you could really decide to mix and match how you wanted to create your orc minifigures. And personally, I'm glad that the modern day orcs actually use very different styles of helmets than just reusing the Uruk-hai helmet over and over again. The last Mordor orc here actually has hair. It is the same hair used on the Moria orc, except this time it's with dark tan printed ears, and this one is a bit of a weaponsmith. As you can see, he's got the hammer and the sword, and again, I do like the designs of these as massable army building characters, but they're definitely not as exciting as the Uruk-hai with all the armor and the shield elements, or even some of the other villain characters here. The orcs honestly don't interest me that much in terms of the minifigure designs. I much more gravitate towards the hero characters, but I still feel like some of the villains have got a lot of sauce, and these ones are just alright. Looks like meat's back on the menu, boys. This is literally the chef orc, and I find it so funny how in the Barad-dûr set, they included a restaurant with a menu that explains, of course, how orcs would know what a menu is. So he has a sausage that he's cooking, he's got a chef hat on, which is the official placement of that piece for the minifigure, but they also include a ton of different orc helmets in that one set. They were able to get away with it by having them be in a multi-pack, which means they only paid for one new element frame to have all of those extra pieces designed and molded all together. So if you want to actually choose to equip this one more in your fantasy armies and not just have it be kind of like the one-off chef gag, well, you can always do that by simply removing the hat. You can see what the face looks like on the other side there, and placing the helmet on, maybe swap out the accessory, and boom, you have an orc that's ready for battle. Moving up to 2024, here's another one of the exclusive Barad-dûr orcs with the very specialized helmet that he has right there. I've given him the Uruk-hai shield, which is the newer design, which I don't love, but I do love how every single orc that we've gotten since the relaunch has been distinctly different. Sure, some of them share the same torsos or leg attachments, but they all are completely unique combinations of minifig parts. And more often than not, almost every single one has at least one exclusive element that kind of makes them stand apart. And as opposed to all of the orcs looking identical for the other sets, or just being slightly less armored versions of each other, I really appreciate how the relaunch has given us very unique and varied orc designs, like this one here. You can see the printing on the torso is different from all the other ones we've gotten, and of course it's got the very unique helmet as well. Now, we got one more of these in the Grand gift with purchase, but unfortunately they did not have the budget to include that helmet set again, so this one just uses a standard gunmetal gray Viking helmet, which if you do own the Barad-dûr set and don't care about having the minifigs in your official configurations, obviously it comes with a lot of extra helmets, you can just swap them in and out, but it is a little unfortunate to not have those helmets return, especially because they were very distinctly orc styled, and this one just kind of feels like a more generic Lego element. Now, that being said, I do think it does fit the orc style generally okay enough, especially because it is in that similar style of shaping and vein, and it is just reusing some printed components from the Barad-dûr set, but again with a different helmet, so this one does feel unique, and it's a really good way to amass your armies by having a lot of different torsos and legs and having different arm colors and leg colors, so you can really just decide to make it really look like this is a horde of kind of savages right here with no sort of organization in their uniform. But with the Lord of the Rings orcs covered, it's time to move into The Hobbit. Now, this is one of the most bizarre LEGO Lord of the Ring exclusives. It was a San Diego Comic-Con exclusive, except the minifigure was not exclusive. It was just a way to be able to get the brand new Azog minifigure early. This came out during Comic-Con 2013, and Azog himself would not feature in sets until the 2014 wave, which is really interesting. I do find this very cute though. There was a Lord of the Rings Father's Day challenge, which showcases Gimli and Gloin, because obviously Gloin is his father, which is very cool, and it also mentions you get a 19-inch brick-built model of Gandalf signed by Peter Jackson, which I don't think we have any images of online. I'd love to be proven wrong. I think that's super interesting, but really, the only exclusive part of this is this piece of cardboard right here, showcasing it is a Comic-Con exclusive. The minifigure itself is just a standard, generic Azog minifigure that we would get later on, so let's, well, take a look at Azog right now. Azog was the Pale Orc, and he was basically invented for the Hobbit movies to have a villain to be cheering against, because there wasn't really one main central villain throughout the entire story, and Azog was there to keep the entire threads together. He was also played by Deathstroke from the CW Arrow series, which is a fun fact that not a lot of people know because he was completely CGI'd. It's really cool how much effort they put into crafting this character. You've got a specialized piece used for the claw in his arm there, which is very cool because obviously that was something that he used throughout the movies as part of his motivation to get revenge on Thorin, who chopped his hand off. And of course, he does have a specialized sculpt for his head as well that goes over a uniquely printed body. Now, it's a little bit tricky to get off there, but you can see that's what he looks like without the head sculpt on there. It is super specialized, but also it kind of feels like this is how LEGO would produce him nowadays. It is really nicely done. It still retains the LEGO look and feel, while feeling very menacing. No printing on the back though. I feel like you could have taken the opportunity to print some of the scars on the back there instead of just leaving it plain tan. But again, that's completely almost covered up by the actual cover here. So I think it was all right that they skimped out on that. And that claw hand is so cool. I don't know how LEGO would do this today, but I don't think they would do it like that. They'd probably just give him a gray hand. And this is just so much more interesting as a LEGO piece. For the Battle of the Five Army sets, they clearly had the budget to give him a different expression. This is our second version of Azog with an open mouth, but unfortunately throughout that movie, he actually wears some pretty heavy armor that covers up his whole torso and legs, and we never got that as a minifigure. I feel like that was a pretty big missed opportunity because you had the mold for Azog, they easily could have done it. He also stuck like a sword into his arm instead of the claw hand, so honestly this kind of just feels like a slightly different expression for the character we already got, released for sets where he wasn't wearing this outfit, but maybe that was a concept art thing. It could have been late in the game where they decided to do that, and it is still a very cool minifigure. I think it is really sold by the fact that he has this very menacing claw hand, and of course, the molded headpiece there for Azog, which we hadn't really had ever gotten for a Lord of the Rings minifigure before quite like this. In the first movie, Azog's second-in-command here is Yazneg, and really interestingly, he uses a plain monochrome unprinted LEGO Ninjago Skullkin armor. It's the only time that armor piece has appeared outside the LEGO Ninjago theme, and because it is so specialized, showcasing the skeleton symbol on the other side, they literally had to reverse the armor for him to wear it because it was the only spiky armor in production around 2013 when this minifigure came out. He also has a bone axe, which I gave him because obviously that ties into the Skullkin, but it is so cool to see that as an official LEGO piece because it's very rare for a specialized Ninjago piece like that to actually make it outside of the theme, and yet here it is. This is what the minifigure looks like without the armor on. Legs being unprinted is a little disappointing. Definitely would have preferred to have some leg printing there, but otherwise, it's not the most exciting thing. I think the most interesting thing about it is this piece right here, which recolors that Skullkin armor and kept it alive just long enough to be used in some other sets. Azog leads a pack of hunter orcs as they're marketed, and the only difference between these and the Mordor orcs that we got for the Lord of the Rings line is that these ones actually have leg printing, which is really nice. They bothered to give them leg printing, which is not something we were used to for a lot of the villainous minifigures in Lord of the Rings, so it was extra special to be able to get that for these. We also got a couple of hunter orcs that actually had a very different head print though. These ones have some white facial markings, which is interesting because they wanted to create at least something unique and different for the Hobbit movies. This one here is an archer because he has the quiver there, and then you have this longer kind of top knot style of hair going on the back that is specifically to accommodate the quiver being placed there, and that piece actually popped up in a lot more themes since this, so LEGO really got their mileage out of the orc hairpiece. There's one more official variation of the Hunter Orc here, and this one does not have the quiver, and it's notable because, of course, this is going to give us our best look at the back print of those minifigures, pretty much the same as the Mordor Orcs, but again, you do have that exclusive head print there with the white markings, no relation to Saruman, and unfortunately, they did not print on the back of the head. I feel like that would have been a great opportunity to do so, especially because a lot of the other orcs do have little straggles of hair printed on the back of the head, but they decided not to because I guess they figured the top knot hairpiece is already there, so why bother? Azog also leads a new breed of Gundabad orcs against the Dwarf Company, and these are meaner and more powerful than a lot of the other orcs that we've seen so far. As such, they have these really specialized dual color painted spike armor elements, which is a very cool LEGO piece. I definitely think that this is one of the more interesting pieces to come out of the armor wave, and they continue to use it across a number of different themes and minifigures since its inception, which really goes to show that it's a bit more of a ubiquitous armor element. This one is your most fully armored up version of what a Gundabad orc could look like, appearing in sets with the armor and the hair, but you also have versions of the figure that just appear in sets with only the armor, so you can see what that looks like right there. And then you have sets that only appear with the hair and no armor, so you can see what he looks like right there. And then you have versions that appear with the brand new head print, but no armor or hair. So that one's the head print with the white detailing on the minifigure. And then you can see what the back printing looks like with the teeth. And then finally, for the lowest of the low, you have just a minifigure with no hair, no armor, old face print, nothing crazy going on here. But again, nice to get just a slightly different minifigure that again helps you add to your army builds. Not every single one is going to be the fully most outfitted one with armor, with hair, with a weapon, and sometimes you're just kind of stuck with the luck of the draw. When you're an orc, you never really know what kinds of armor you're going to get handed, so I feel like it's kind of realistic and it helps diversify the armies a lot. With the Goblin King covered, it's time to take a look at some of the other goblins and trolls that we see right here. So this is a goblin that appears in the Hobbit trilogy, and they actually introduced a brand new rubberized head sculpt for all of the goblins, which is really interesting to see. It definitely falls off a lot because it is fully rubberized. I don't think they fully nailed it when creating this mold, but it is still really interesting to see a piece that they undoubtedly would just create a solid plastic mold for today. And I believe the reason it was rubberized is because the ears of the minifigure are actually relatively pointy and they just stick straight out of the character. Now, you can see here that all of the goblins actually have unique designs. This one has some chains on him. There's an alternate expression as well, showcasing a few more deformities, and that's what the back printing looks like. So that is a pretty interesting variant right there. This one, on the other hand, has a bit more personality. He's got some tooth charm on his necklace, which I think just adds a little bit of extra depth to the character here. And then onto the back, you can see a slightly different print as well, which really goes to show they wanted to differentiate these characters and not just use the same torso and legs, which is surprising given many of the orcs do that. Finally, we have the short goblin here. I guess this one's the messenger one who sends the message to Azog that the dwarves are inside the bowels of the mountain that the Goblin King tells him to send. It's a funny looking creature, and again, this one does have the exclusive torso, so you can have a special print on the back, a print on the front, and then he is just using that standard goblin head, but I think it works very well for the character, and it is funny to actually get this particular goblin as a minifigure. They have a cave troll. In the advent of LEGO Big Figs around this era, 2012 was when we got some of the first modern LEGO Big Figs in the form of the Hulk for Marvel superheroes. They released one of our first Lord of the Rings Big Figs in the form of this massive cave troll. And I feel like Lord of the Rings needs more Big Figs because this is really well done. It was before they decided on the template for Big Figs in general with LEGO, and that's why this one has a few strange oddities. For one, the hands are specially molded to just have two fingers there that is exclusive to this and the Goblin King. The arms are their own molds as well with the ratchet joints. The entire thing is very highly specially molded. There are a couple of studs on the top if you want to perform some sort of a takedown, and it looks so accurate compared to the movie, but again, it's probably a little bit too specialized compared to the type of figure LEGO would make today, which is really interesting to consider because I love this Big Fig. Of course, on the topic of The Hobbit, we have to talk about the Goblin King. This has got to be one of the most despicable LEGO Big Figs ever made, and I find it so funny how they tried to replicate his very rotund proportions. There were running gags in the movie where he was using other goblins as chairs and he kept squishing them, and I was so curious back in the day even how LEGO would attempt to depict this character, and it's actually really well done. I don't know if LEGO would make a Big Fig like this today. Maybe they would make him like a specialized mold or a slightly larger minifigure. I don't know, this just feels so specific and special for the Lord of the Rings theme, and he does even have his special skull and bones staff there. I really love how the molding detail captured almost everything you would need. You've got the double chin, you have the big belly, you have the arms and the hands and the legs, and like, it's just such a unique design to get for a Lord of the Rings and Hobbit adjacent minifigure, and definitely one of the standout ones on this list. It's always cool to get Big Figs after all. Alright, and with that, we have summed up our final chapter of every LEGO Lord of the Rings minifigure ever. From the hobbits, to the men and wizards, to the elves, the dwarves, and now the orcs and other villains, this has been the full coverage of the entire LEGO Lord of the Rings minifigure lineup. I hope you enjoyed our look through history from 2012 all the way to 2026, and I cannot wait to see what the future holds. There's already a rumored Oliphant set coming out in January I am so excited for, and I'm gonna guess and go out on a limb that the direct-to-consumer set next year is probably going to be Edoras, given that they want to focus on a different style and location every single year, and they've never really covered that in LEGO form before, so I'm really hopeful to what next year will bring. This has been a fantastic year for Lord of the Rings with Minas Tirith and Grond, which gave us 2 of the minifigures on this list, and that's all I have to say for now. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video series. It took an entire day to film all of these, so I really hope you enjoyed taking a look at the up-close details of all the minifigures of Middle-earth. Thanks so much for watching, and bye for now.